So trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry, Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 12 o'clock on Tuesday, the 4th of June. I'm Tom Harwood.
And I'm Emily Carver.
New battleground on immigration. Rishi Sunak vows to bring down migrant numbers by introducing a new cap on visas if he wins the general election.
But could this be down to Nigel Farage's shock decision to stand for Parliament for Reform UK? He's calling for net zero migration.
Meanwhile, the Labour Party has pledged to bring energy security to the UK and end its dependence on fossil fuels from overseas. But a new battle is brewing over plans to tax oil and gas even more.
And D-Day veterans make the journey to France, where they will be honoured for their part in the liberation of Normandy. We'll be there.
On net migration. Where have I heard that before? This is the sort of thing that the Conservatives were promising in the 2010 general election. Never introduced, partly because they couldn't. We were in the EU, so it would be physically impossible, illegal, but also because they were in coalition. But after that election, we sort of just lost sight of all of that. But Robert Jenrick, the former immigration minister, has been calling for precisely this policy.
Yes, he has, and he did say publicly that Rishi Sunak hadn't been interested in the past about talking to him about legal migration and how to get it down. That's what he said. Suella Braverman has said similar. But this is quite interesting, this proposal from the Conservatives. I want to get your thoughts on this at home, gbnews.com/your say. One of the things they're proposing is to give MPs a vote on this annual cap. Now, can you imagine how that would play out?
I can see difficulties.
10,000, 20,000, 30,000. How would you vote on it? Someone would have to propose, presumably the Home Secretary or the Prime Minister would propose a figure. Then you'd vote on it. If it got voted down, then would you try a different figure? How would it work?
But what if this happened in 2022 and the Ukraine war started in the middle of that year? What then? Do we just have no refugee scheme for Ukrainians, or do we amend the cap? I mean, we took in hundreds of thousands of Hong Kongers.
Yes.
Do we amend the cap on that? You can start to see when you get to the individual particulars of it, it becomes less simple.
And, of course, exemptions apply for temporary work visas, such as seasonal agricultural type visas. So you can see how the policy gets more and more complicated. Sounds very straightforward, cap on visas, but what's the number? How did the votes go? And what do you do with all these various exemptions? But there you go. Let us know what you think. gbnews.com/your say. But let's get the headlines with Aaron.
Good afternoon. It's 2 minutes past 2. I'm Aaron Armstrong. The Conservatives have pledged to reduce the number of migrant visas handed out each year. The cap on those coming to the UK to work or join family would be based on a recommendation by the Migration Advisory Committee and would be voted on by MPs. Net migration levels, that's the difference between people leaving and arriving in the UK each year, are now 3 times higher than they were in 2019. Home Secretary James Cleverly says their plan will strike a balance between both the advantages and the costs.
So the last couple of years, the figures have been much too high, including on legal immigration. And there are some people that like that large volume of legal migration for work purposes. But what we're doing now is we're saying in the future, we will balance both the benefits of immigration, of course there are benefits, but also the cost of immigration.
Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer says the Conservatives are responsible for the rising numbers and points out this plan reverses a decision the party took 4 years ago when it reformed the immigration system as part of Brexit.
The Conservatives have let immigration get out of control. We've got record numbers of people coming to this country, and they've now said they're going to have a visa cap. They've not said what the number is. They've got a visa cap without a cap. We did have a visa cap before. Rishi Sunak argued to get rid of it, which they did in 2020, and now they're going back to it but without a number. It is utter chaos.
The Lib Dems are promising free personal care for adults in England who need it, including the elderly and the disabled. Sir Ed Davey says he wants to pay carers an extra £2 an hour above the national living wage. And he says investment in the care sector will ultimately benefit the NHS. Now, this is a personal issue for the Lib Dem party leader. He looks after a disabled son, and he will later outline his party's belief that provision of care should be based on need rather than affluence.
We need more people to be supported in care, to look after loved ones who are either waiting to be discharged from hospital or so they don't have to go into hospital. If we do that, we rescue our NHS. Our NHS is on its knees, and one of the main reasons it's on its knees is people haven't invested in social care and they haven't looked after family carers, and our package today does just that.
A ferry carrying D-Day veterans to France for the 80th anniversary commemorations has set sail from Portsmouth. The Mont Saint-Michel is being accompanied by a number of Royal Navy ships. There's 3 patrol vessels, a mine hunter, a training ship and a couple of tugboats as well as it left Portsmouth Harbour. Now, over off the coast of France, US troops have been carrying out a landing on a replica craft at Omaha Beach this morning. This is part of the D-Day commemorations in Normandy. Omaha, one of 2 beaches taken by US forces 80 years ago. Kenneth Nishiori told us about the impact D-Day had on his grandfather, who took part in the landing.
I'm amazed that he was even actually here because it was an experience he never talked about. Like a lot of veterans, you rarely heard any war stories. And I knew he was in the Army, but that was it. Growing up as a kid, I'd never heard any stories. It wasn't until I got a box of letters from my mom, from granddaddy to grandma, talking about his time in France.
Now, DNA tests have revealed 3 babies have been abandoned by the same parents over the past 7 years. One of the children was about an hour old when she was found left in a shopping bag in East London earlier this year in sub-zero conditions. Her 2 siblings, 2 boys, were discovered in similar circumstances in 2017 and 2019. The details have emerged after reporting restrictions were lifted. A police investigation into the identity of the parents is ongoing. 10 fire engines and around 70 firefighters have been tackling a major blaze in East London. It broke out in a 10-floor construction site in Canning Town. And no reports of any injuries. Police have advised people to keep their windows and doors closed. The cause of the fire is under investigation. Right, you can get more on all of our stories by signing up to our news alerts. The QR code's on your screen, or you can go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now back to Tom and Emily.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 7 minutes past 12. Now to our top story this hour. Immigration has today, surprisingly, become a key battleground for the Prime Minister in today's general election campaigning.
It has indeed. So Rishi Sunak has come out and vowed an annual cap on visas. This is a way of limiting the number of migrants coming to the UK.
Well, it follows Nigel Farage's decision to stand for Parliament in Essex. The new Reform UK party leader says he wants 0 net migration.
Meanwhile, the Labour Party today is focusing on energy security, making Britain less dependent on what it calls rogue states to provide energy resources. So it's all going on. It's all going on.
Let's get the overview now with our political correspondent, Catherine Forster, who's in Westminster for us. And Catherine, the race seems to have shifted somewhat in the last 12 hours.
Yes, good afternoon, Tom and Emily. It certainly has. I mean, to be honest, things were all going pretty badly for the Conservatives, weren't they? Because they've made all these policy announcements, national service, the triple lock plus for pensions, etc., etc. But nothing has shifted the dial. In fact, if anything, the polls are going in a worse direction for the Conservative Party. And then late yesterday afternoon, suddenly here comes Nigel Farage, having said the morning after Rishi Sunak announced that shock general election date that he didn't have time to sort of get it together and he was going to concentrate on the states, that he's had a change of heart. He's going to stand for Clacton and he's going to lead the revolt, he says. So it has injected a whole lot of excitement into this election campaign. But frankly, it is the Conservative Party's worst nightmare, because already it looked like Reform were going to take a lot of seats from the Conservatives. And it's likely that Nigel Farage, who's a big figure, love him or loathe him, he's well known, he's got a way of cutting through with ordinary people that perhaps the nominal leader, Richard Tice, until yesterday did not have. So he's likely to make Reform votes go even higher, even worse for the Conservative Party. So let's see in a few days when we get the next set of polls how things are looking for Rishi Sunak. It feels like they couldn't get much worse, and yet they just have. There'll be a lot riding on the TV debate tonight.
Yes, it'll be very interesting indeed to see the most up-to-date polls that take into account this change in the election campaign. But Catherine, it's interesting, isn't it, that yesterday Nigel Farage launches himself onto the scene into election campaigning, calling this election an immigration election. The very next day, today, the Conservatives come out with a cap on visas. Are they trying to make it about immigration too?
Well, it's difficult for the Conservatives. So yesterday they've come out and said we're going to put a hard cap on visas for people coming into the country to help get immigration down. But of course, the problem is that this is a Conservative Party that's been in office for 14 years. They spent many years saying they'd get it down to the tens of thousands. By the time Boris Johnson got that majority back in 2019, it was running about 230,000 net migration. Boris Johnson pledged to get it down from that. And then, lo and behold, it rocketed to 750,000. And although it's dropping slightly now, it's still at 680,000. So it's all very well the Conservatives saying they're going to get it down, but it's gone up massively on their watch. And I think it's worth saying too that for all there's many people thinking that they should never have got rid of Boris Johnson, who was of course an incredible campaigner and did get that 80-seat majority, you know, the Brexit vote to take back control, we do have control now in terms of the numbers of people coming into the country. So the fact that net migration went up to 750,000, that happened on Boris Johnson's watch as a result of deliberate decisions that the government has made, because it's not like when we were within the EU and we couldn't control the numbers coming in. We can, and the government has chosen to let those numbers go sky high. And now, of course, they're realising that this is going to come back to bite them in a very, very significant way. But are people going to give them any credit? I should say it's worth saying that following steps that the government have already taken, net migration is projected to be down to about 300,000 by the autumn. But of course, that's too late for Rishi Sunak, and Labour are likely to come in, and then they will be able to take the credit for that, even though it won't, in fact, be anything to do with Labour policies.
Yet again, Keir Starmer appears to be the luckiest man in politics. Not only are the SNP imploding amongst themselves, the Tories are infighting, Nigel Farage has re-entered the fray, but also by simply becoming Prime Minister and changing literally nothing about our migration policy, Keir Starmer will be able to claim credit for a more than halving of our net migration score next year, thanks to the reforms that Robert Jenrick has already made. A very lucky man in politics, although politics is all about lucky generals, I suppose, to paraphrase Napoleon. But Catherine, tonight there is a debate, of course, and the Prime Minister will be hoping that this television debate is a moment that can shift things in this campaign, could it?
Yes, the Prime Minister needs desperately something to change. Sir Keir Starmer needs nothing to change and everything to stay the same. So a lot riding on this, and particular for Rishi Sunak, nothing they've done so far has shifted the dial. You know, they've cut 4p off national insurance. Nobody gave them any credit for that. All the announcements subsequent that they thought would shift the dial haven't worked. So Rishi Sunak has been prepping with Oliver Dowden, he's his closest ally, and he's also prepped many, many leaders in the past. They've got to get this right. I've been around the Prime Minister a lot in the last month, and what has really struck me is how energetic and positive and upbeat he seems despite the dire predictions. We have in the past, though, seen a rather tetchy Rishi here and there, and in the leadership contest with Liz Truss, once or twice he really talked over her and interrupted her and didn't always come across well. So they desperately need the energetic, positive, upbeat Rishi tonight. No sign of tetchy Rishi at all. Very difficult for him to be so upbeat and positive given all the projections at the moment.
Yeah, he's got to find his inner zen.
His inner zen. Thank you very much indeed, Catherine there. Great to get your thoughts. Shall we get the thoughts of the founder and CEO of Electoral Calculus, Martin Baxter? Martin, thank you very much indeed. Pollsters, they've got a lot of work to do. There have been lots of polls coming out that have been showing kind of the same thing. The Tories lagging behind around 20 points from Labour, Reform at about the 10% to 12% mark, sometimes lower, sometimes higher. Nigel Farage launching himself into the campaign. What are you expecting to change?
Well, yeah, so Labour have had a consistent lead of as you say, over 20% in recent months, which is larger, just to put it in context, than Tony Blair had in 1997. So potentially very large indeed. And the Conservatives have already been losing a lot of votes to Reform. And I think the way to guess, although we haven't had data yet, is that Nigel Farage's intervention will increase the votes for Reform a bit. But the thing to remember is that Reform, as you say, are still polling around 10 or 12% in the polls. And even if they go up by 5%, which would be quite a good result, they're still short, they're still below 20%, and Reform really need to be getting above 20% if they're going to win any seats. So the growth of Reform, its impact will be that Reform will still not win any seats, other than possibly one or two around Clacton and elsewhere, but they will cost the Conservatives maybe another 20 seats. So things could get worse for the Conservatives even than they are at the moment.
I know you've been doing some polling. We've seen your MRP research as well. Fundamentally, all of that is now out of date. At what point will we start to see the polls that take into account the shift that we're all expecting to take place that could have happened as of yesterday afternoon?
Well, at the end of the week is the answer, I think. But until then, we do have a poll from People's Polling for GBNews itself, which had a Labour lead of 24%. So that's a bit bigger. We saw we used 22% in our poll at the weekend. So that could take another 10 or 15 seats off the Conservatives. And that actually would leave the Conservatives in danger of not even being the opposition in Parliament, that Ed Davey would be the leader of the Lib Dems, would be leader of the opposition, and the Conservatives would be the third party. So we're beginning to approach that territory.
He's got to find a bigger water slide.
Farage, then that could perhaps turn out to happen.
Goodness me. I suppose one of the things that Rishi Sunak was hoping that this general election campaign would deliver was a tightening of the polls. After all, we've generally seen polls tighten through campaigns in history. If anything, though, the first few polls that we've seen of the first week of this campaign, things have gone in the other direction.
I'd say it's mostly stable. I think the Conservatives' hope is probably founded on two things. One, that there might be an error in the polls, as there was back in 1992 when the polls predicted Neil Kinnock would win and he didn't. So there could be polling error. And I think the Conservatives are also hoping that Keir Starmer would wilt under the campaign pressure. We've seen a couple of maybe dodgy moments for the Labour leader so far, but he's not. He's still holding in there, I'd say. And so the debate coming up will be the Conservatives' test to see whether they can put some pressure on Keir Starmer and Labour. But if the polls continue anything like they are at the moment, then Labour are going to win. But there are still a few weeks to go and things may change.
And Martin, lots of talk about immigration today, of course, from Reform, but the Conservatives as well, proposing a new cap on worker visas and the like. Some say this is an immigration election. Is it?
Well, it's certainly talked about a lot on the centre-right. The Conservative and Reform voters tell us very often that immigration is a big concern for many of those. It is less of a concern for Labour and Lib Dem voters. But it's certainly a potential issue that that could move some votes. But it may be that it just confirms people's attitudes in parties they'd already selected. But we will see.
No, interesting stuff. Well, Martin Baxter, founder and CEO of Electoral Calculus, really appreciate your time this afternoon. Thank you.
Oh, so much going on. Anyway, here is a full list of those who have declared their candidacy in the constituency of Clacton so far. I'm not sure why we're reading this. Jovan Owusu Nepal, Labour Party; Giles Watling, Conservative Party; Matthew Bensalem, Liberal Democrats; Nigel Farage, Reform UK; Natasha Osborne, Green Party.
There we go. Now, the list of candidates isn't finalised, of course, until the deadline later in the week, when I'm sure there will be a few more candidates, no doubt, in this constituency. Perhaps a monster raving loony party, a man dressed as a fish finger, maybe even a man with a bin on his head. I expect we're going to get quite a few candidates like that in this particular constituency.
And of course, we've extended an interview invitation to all of the candidates, so we hope to see them on this channel very soon indeed. But coming up, Keir Starmer says Labour will close the door on Putin by reducing Britain's reliance on fossil fuels from overseas. But there's a little row going on about taxing oil and gas even more. We'll have more on that shortly. This is Good Afternoon Britain. We're on GB News.
Nana Queer, weekends from 3 p.m.
What about the elections? Because it seems that the King and everything is moving because of it, and we've got a lot of royal engagements and things that happen at this time.
Yes, well, it means that he has to take more time and be at home. He can't go to all the things he wants to do. He's been doing 5 a day, which has probably made Camilla a bit cross. But what they still hope is that they can get the Japanese Emperor and Empress over. That's in July. That they can go to France for the 80th anniversary of the fighting. And he will be able to do 1 or 2 things. And Ascot he's very keen to do. Now, those aren't things that are political in any way. Just want to talk about Harry and Charles's argument, where Harry said he didn't want to stay, he wanted to go to a hotel. And it's come out now that actually King Charles is believed that he was offered St James's, and Princess Anne stays there and Beatrice stays there.
And this was for when Harry came over for his 10th
yeah,
anniversary
exactly. And the policemen are wandering around with guns, and there's no chance of actually there being any problem there. So the fact that he said that it wasn't safe for him was not actually a very sensible thing to say, I don't think.
Well, he went to Nigeria, and that is, in the world ranking, it's ranked as quite a dangerous place.
Yes, one of the dangerous places in the world. But now Harry and Meghan have been invited to go to Ghana.
Oh, God. Well, it's interesting because my parents are from Ghana. I have Ghanaian heritage, and I'm thinking she'll probably then claim there's a percentage that she's Ghanaian as well. I'll be like, hang on a minute, you were Maltese, you're also Nigerian,
and
now
German,
you're going to say you're Ghanaian and German.
Yeah.
Come on. Thank you very much.
Squeeze it in.
Yeah, let's get them all in. Angela Levin, thank you very much.
Thank you.
The People's Channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Neil Oliver, every Sunday night at 6 p.m. on GB News. And if an hour is not nearly enough for you, go to gbnews.com for special extended episodes online every Friday at 9 p.m, where we can truly get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, and as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 23 minutes past 12. Now, yesterday, Sir Keir Starmer set out his plans to tackle national security. Today, he's looking at energy security. Can you spot a theme here?
Security?
Something about security, I think. But Labour will close the door on Putin, so says Keir Starmer, by reducing Britain's reliance on fossil fuels from overseas.
But the Confederation of British Industry, that's the body that represents almost 200,000 businesses, is urging Sir Keir Starmer to reconsider plans to increase the windfall tax on North Sea oil and gas firms.
Well, joining us now is our economics and business editor, Liam Halligan, with On the Money. Liam, which is it? Are we going to get more secure with the Labour plans for more green energy or less with their taxes on fossil fuels?
Well, I must say, Tom and Emily, I've been waiting for quite a long time for a bit of detail on Labour's energy plan, and very little is forthcoming except, as you say, more rhetoric about the windfall tax on North Sea oil and gas projects. Let's have a little look at some of what Keir Starmer has said today and the implications. Keir Starmer said that Labour's new energy entity, GB Energy it's called, will close the door on Vladimir Putin. That's what he says. We now know that GB Energy is going to be a publicly owned investment company. Like, we don't know where the money for the investment is going to come from, rather than a utility company. Previous speculation was that it would replace the private sector utility companies. That's now no longer the case. Just shows you how vague these plans are. We barely know what this entity, GB Energy, is. It's worth saying, as I've said to you before on GB News, that half of all active oil and gas fields in the North Sea are due to close by 2030, believe it or not. And hang on to your hat, strap yourself in, because the North Sea still provides 83% of the UK's oil and 54% of the natural gas that we use. And oil and gas still account for overall about 3/4 of all the energy we use when you include transport. So look, energy policy, it used to be the preserve of policy wonks, economists and nerds like me. After the war in Ukraine, massive spike in energy prices, not just for households, but companies as well, which is why even the usually very herbivorous Confederation of British Industry, always keen to get close to incoming governments, is complaining, because UK firms in particular, households have had some help with their energy bills. UK firms are paying more for their energy, their electricity, not least our manufacturers, than any other major economy in Europe. That's led to inflation. That's pushed up the cost of living crisis. That has hindered our productivity and our growth and all the rest of it. And I'm afraid to say, with the best will in the world, I still can't see anything in Labour's statements on energy which gives me any detail on what they're actually going to do about this.
Yeah, I mean, Liam, John's got in touch and he's saying, I still want to know exactly what this GB Energy is. Is it a generating company to rival the likes of British Gas? Is it a facilities company? What's the cost of setting it up? How many people is it going to employ? Is it just another Quango? It seems to me that from what I've read about it, that it's more of an investment vehicle.
We know that now. We didn't really know it before. And that's how sketchy the details are. And something else is happening here, Emily. Look, there is a long-term move away from fossil fuels. The UK used to use coal-fired power stations to generate 40% of our electricity. As recently as the turn of this century, it's now just 1 or 2% every year, which is coal. Renewables do account for roughly 1/3 to 2/5 of the electricity that we generate. But, when we really look at this, is it true to say that renewables are, quotes, cheap? And at the moment, they're not cheap because of the big subsidies that are paid, put on households and firms' electricity bills to pay for subsidies for wind farms, such as you're seeing now, offshore wind farms, to pay for subsidies for solar power and so on. And, of course, the fact that renewables are intermittent means, as we've often discussed here on GB News, that we have to fall back often on a day-to-day basis on gas-fired power stations, which are very, very expensive to fire up. So it's almost as if our high share of renewables in the UK, and as I say, about 2/5 of our electricity is renewables on some days, is actually harming households because it's leading at the moment to more expensive energy bills. And that reality is just now starting to seep through into the political mainstream, if you like. It's something that people like me have been saying for months and even years. And it strikes me, GB News viewers and listeners, some of them will dismiss the whole idea of moving to net zero. Others will say, well, we do need to wean ourselves off oil and gas and fossil fuels over the medium term. But if we're going to do that, we've got to demonstrate to voters that renewables do lead to lower bills overall. And at the moment, they're not. And I can't see anything in these Labour plans, with the best will in the world. I'm very committed to looking in detail at the policy proposals of all the main parties. I can't see anything in these Labour plans which answers any of the questions that I've just posed. And I say that with regret, because we desperately need to have a proper discussion about our energy security.
We do, and it's so fascinating to look at all of these different ideas. Of course, it would be lovely to have lots more wind farms and even solar farms and nuclear power, which wouldn't arrive for another 10 years. But it needs to be married with some form of storage or capture for when the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow. I don't think we've heard anything about energy storage. We've heard about distribution, we've heard about generation, but not storage.
Indeed, energy storage is the great imponderable. Some people, some scientists, put forward the use of hydrogen as a storage vehicle. Others say that we should be building much more underground gas storage. All we've got is the facility off the Yorkshire coast at Rough, a facility which has been largely diminished in recent years, though it has some extra capacity has reopened, but our gas storage is still very, very low by international standards. Look, I think the real focus for this isn't just going to be Labour and the Tories arguing over net zero. Another focus is going to be Scotland, which, of course, is so important to this election. Labour can't win big unless it wins big in Scotland, as it did back in 1997. And Scottish opinion is very, very split. Aberdeen is the oil and gas capital of Europe. You know, talk to trade unions across the country. Do they want to see an even bigger windfall tax on North Sea oil and gas? No, they don't. The GMB union does not, because it's got tens of thousands of workers with well-paid jobs in the oil and gas sector. And indeed, this is a big chunk of Scotland's economy. So this is largely a sort of very technical area, but, you know, high electricity and gas bills, hugely important in the minds of households and firms. And energy, I think, is a very, very difficult area for Labour, because it's got its kind of urban, pro-environment, left-wing voters who want more net zero initiatives. But then again, it's got a lot of natural voters in Scotland who look at what's happening in Aberdeen and suggest, gosh, the windfall tax on North Sea oil and gas is already 75% of profits, and now Labour say they want a proper windfall tax.
I think it's 78%, I think they want. Thank you so much, Liam Halligan, Economics and Business Editor, for setting that all out for us. And, of course, the CBI as well, warning that this may have an impact, well, this extra windfall tax, an impact not just on investment confidence in that industry, but in others,
isn't it?
In the financial services, in other industries as well.
When 75% tax isn't high enough, I mean, it boggles the mind.
But, I mean, they do say on their website for Great British Energy, they say Labour's plan will lower bills because renewables are far cheaper than gas. But as Liam was setting out there, it's a lot more complicated than that. There's a big subsidy scheme in place at the moment, and yes, storage, critical. Anyway, moving on. Get your thoughts in about that, by the way. GB Energy.
Well, still to come, we'll be crossing to Normandy, looking ahead at those D-Day 80th anniversary events, all those preparations honouring our British veterans, and indeed, veterans from across the Commonwealth and around the world. This is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News.
Hi there, it's 12:33. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB newsroom. Sir Keir Starmer has dismissed Rishi Sunak's plans for an annual cap on visas, saying the government's lost control of net migration. Under the plan, MPs would vote on visa numbers for those coming to the UK to work or join family based on recommendations from the Migration Advisory Committee. The government says it's about having a balanced assessment of both the advantages and costs of migration. However, net migration levels are now 3 times higher than they were in 2019, and the Labour leader says the government's responsible after it removed the cap 4 years ago with the introduction of a post-Brexit skilled workers visa.
The Conservatives have let immigration get out of control. We've got record numbers of people coming to this country, and they've now said they're going to have a visa cap. They've not said what the number is. They've got a visa cap without a cap. We did have a visa cap before. Rishi Sunak argued to get rid of it, which they did in 2020, and now they're going back to it but without a number. It is utter chaos.
The Liberal Democrats are promising free personal care for adults in need, including the elderly and disabled. Sir Ed Davey, himself a carer for a disabled son, wants carers to get an extra £2 an hour above the national living wage. He says social care is under pressure and millions of families in the UK need more support, but it's also about people who work in the care sector who need to be looked after. A ferry carrying D-Day veterans to France for the 80th anniversary commemorations set sail earlier from Portsmouth. This is the Mont Saint-Michel ferry, and people on board waving. You can see it's being accompanied by a number of Royal Navy ships and patrol boats, a mine hunter, a training vessel and a couple of tugboats as well. That's it leaving Portsmouth Harbour earlier this morning. Also earlier this morning, US troops were on a replica landing craft at Omaha Beach. This is part of D-Day commemorations in Normandy. Omaha, one of the 2 beaches taken by US forces 80 years ago. For the latest on our story, sign up to GB News Alerts. You can scan the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
The latest GB News travel.
Southbound on the M6, there's a lane closure on the exit slip road to junction 41 to a broken down vehicle. Traffic is coping well. Long delays for West Yorkshire and the M62, a lane closure to emergency barrier repairs following an earlier accident from junctions 23 for Huddersfield through to Wishford Moor at 22. Congestion is to 25, that's westbound, and it's adding around 30 minutes to your morning journey in both directions. Clockwise on the M25, all lanes have now reopened following an earlier lane closure at Romford and Basildon. It's on the move between junctions 29 through to 30. Very slow, however, for the northbound side of the M6. There are 3 lanes closed to an accident from junctions 18 through to Knutsford at junction 19. And that's the very latest travel news.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website gbnews.com.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
How prevalent is it in those with darker skin, like me?
That's a great question, and it's one that we get a lot. So your skin tone does affect your risk of skin cancer. People at the most risk are people with lighter skin tones, so light-coloured hair and eyes as well, lots of moles and freckles, a history of sunburn or a family history of skin cancer. But people with darker skin tones can still burn and can still get skin cancer. Anybody can get skin cancer. So I would encourage everybody, regardless of your ethnicity or your skin tone, to think really seriously about taking care when it's sunny. That myth that you've mentioned that black people can't get skin cancer is really prevalent, and that's something I want to dispel right now immediately. Because more black people think maybe they can't get skin cancer, that might mean that when they spot something unusual for them, they're less likely to go to the doctor and they're diagnosed later. And when you're diagnosed later, your outcomes do tend to be worse.
So the figures are disturbing that more people are getting skin cancer. But what about outcomes? I mean, if you do get skin cancer, what are your prospects?
So yeah, like you say, this research is a mixed picture. We're seeing incidence, so the number of new cases going up, which is not good news. But there is some good news in that mortality, so whether you're going to die or not, is actually going down. And we think that's partly due to early diagnosis, which I just mentioned is so important. But also research has led to better and kinder treatments, which mean the outcomes are likely to be better. So now, if you're diagnosed at the earliest stage, stage 1, with melanoma, actually around 9 in 10 people will survive their disease for 5 years or more.
The People's Channel.
Well, good afternoon, Britain. It's 12:39. Now, Thursday this week is a momentous day. It will mark 80 years since the largest amphibious landing in military history, which saw more than 150,000 Allied troops risking their lives by storming Nazi-occupied beaches in Normandy.
It proved to be the major turning point in the Second World War, ultimately leading to the liberation of Western Europe, the defeat of Nazi Germany and the guarantor of our liberties we enjoy today.
Yes, indeed. Well, let's cross over to Normandy. Our reporter Sophie Reaper is there for the preparations. Sophie, where are you exactly and what's happening today?
Well, a very good afternoon to you both. We're here on Arromanges Beach, which is a part of Gold Beach along the Normandy coastline. Of course, one of the beaches where the British troops would have landed almost 80 years to the day on D-Day. Now, you mentioned there that D-Day was the largest amphibious landing in history, and we are currently aboard one of those amphibious vehicles that would have seen troops taken from the Channel and brought them to shore. Now, a little bit earlier, we took one of these out with us and did an interview out there. So here's what happened while we were out there.
Do you want to talk to me a bit about what we're standing on right now?
So, what you're standing on is a military amphibious duck built in the Second World War to transport cargo from ship to shore. It was also used as ambulances and to transport troops from the Normandy beaches. And if it wasn't for these, we wouldn't have won the war, in my opinion. These managed to drive up straight through the enemy lines and break the fire. And there's so few in the world now, it's rare to see them around the UK and wherever you go. Obviously, we've seen them carry passengers around the world. They're not allowed to do that now. But it's nice to see them active and running.
Let me ask you, we're about to reach the 80th anniversary of D-Day. How does it feel to you to be here at this time, 80 years on?
It feels an absolute... I feel honoured and privileged to be out here and on this machine. And it's all thanks to Harold Payne, who bought the machine off my company and has done it up and made it seaworthy. And it's just great to be out here. And on the 6th of June, we're going to be out laying roses out near the Mulberry Harbour.
Amazing. Just for our viewers, obviously the troops would have come in from that side and made their way to the coastline. How does it feel to almost replicate that journey?
It feels amazing. It just feels amazing. I feel so sorry for those that fell coming up along this beach. For those that didn't even touch the beach, those that fell in the water. I feel so sorry for them and their families. But it feels amazing to be out here to show respect to those that fell. It feels amazing, it really does.
Well, you heard Ryan talking there about the roses that they're going to be laying on the anniversary of D-Day. This is just one of the 600 bunches I think we can now show you. There are 8,000 roses on this vessel alone, and on D-Day they'll be taking this out into the Channel and showing their respects by putting those into the Channel in memory of all those who lost their lives on that day 80 years ago. So incredibly poignant and incredibly moving.
Hugely poignant, and what a moment in the largest conflict the world has ever seen. If this landing, if Gold Beach had gone wrong, if D-Day had gone wrong, the world would look so different today.
Absolutely, and I think that's a sentiment shared by everyone here today. We're, as you say, on Gold Beach. If you look around, there are thousands of people here today, and we're still 2 days away from the anniversary yet, so one will only imagine that number will continue to rise. These beaches are filled with people who are here to pay their respects, but also to celebrate our veterans that still remain with us today.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Sophie Reaper, for bringing us that report. Sophie is, of course, in Normandy for us in preparation for those 80th anniversary of D-Day celebrations and commemorations, of course. Very moving.
It's interesting because so often so many of the commemorations that we experience for wars that have been fought have focused on the First World War, perhaps because it's perhaps seemed further away ago. But now that we're 80 years on almost to the day from D-Day, and the Second World War is now much further in the past from where it was before. Perhaps that is almost spurring on this need for remembrance, this need for recognition.
I think you're right.
Hasn't been there.
I think there's a lot of people out there who are worried that our collective memory will be lost of this event, and we've seen that disappointing polling of younger people, how they don't know what D-Day is, they don't know the significance of the event. So this sort of thing helps to keep it alive. And yesterday, Sophie Reaper talking to the Americans who travelled all the way over, the Belgians as well, Brits, of course, as well. Very interesting indeed to see. And we'll bring you more and more coverage of that.
Absolutely. But of course, coming up, a charity is raising concerns over the decline in handwriting amongst young people. Are we losing what was a pretty standard skill of being able to write things down on paper? Well, we'll be speaking to a teacher about how much we should worry about this emerging trend. You're with Good Afternoon Britain on GB News.
Hello, good morning. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update. It's going to turn a little bit colder from the north today as a band of rain and cloud will push southeastwards. That's a cold front that's sinking southeastwards through the day. Behind it, we've got a dive of much colder air coming in from the north, so there will be a different feel to the weather by this afternoon across parts of Northern Ireland and much of Scotland. So it will turn a bit brighter as the rain and cloud does move through, but there's a risk of some quite blustery showers as well, and quite a brisk breeze. That rain will push into parts of Wales, northern England, perhaps as far south as the southwest through this afternoon. I think most of us will just see quite a lot of cloud around. Ahead of that band, still some brightness, potentially highs of around 21, 22 degrees in the south and east, but most of us are going to notice a bit of a downturn in the temperatures. Some of those showers across the highest ground of Scotland could fall as snow because it is cold enough. It's fairly unusual for this time of year. As I said, it will turn a bit brighter once that rain and cloud does clear through across parts of Northern England, Northern Ireland to end the day, and it will reside across parts of central England into the southwest and southeast by this evening. So I think despite the sunshine in this afternoon across the southeast, the cloud and rain will arrive later on today. That will push south and eastwards through the night, and behind it will turn much clearer, so quite a clear and fairly cold night to come, much colder than it has been lately. You can see temperatures dipping down into the low single figures rurally. There is a risk of a touch of grass frost locally across some places. Showers will still continue across the far northwest, across parts of Scotland, but most of us should stay dry into tomorrow morning with the best of the sunshine across southern and eastern areas. But a cloud will bubble up into the afternoon and showers will develop across parts of Wales, northern England, but they're going to be most frequent across parts of Northern Ireland and northwest Scotland in particular, where there is a further risk of some hill snow. And for all of us, it's going to be feeling cooler with temperatures a little below average.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the argument. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together and what have we got, in my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Patrick Christie's. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threats on.
Our job is to do what's in the best interest of our country.
You made my argument for me. My guest and I tackle the issues that really matter, with a sharp take on every story.
I'm hearing it up and down the country. That was a beginning, not an end.
Patrick Christie's tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 48 minutes past 12. And the Liberal Democrats, it's nice to mention them. Well, they've been out and about today outlining their commitment to improving social care. Let's hear from the party's leader, Sir Ed Davey.
We need more people to be supported in care, to look after loved ones who are either waiting to be discharged from hospital or so they don't have to go into hospital. If we do that, we rescue our NHS. Our NHS is on its knees, and one of the main reasons it's on its knees is people haven't invested in social care and they haven't looked after family carers, and our package today does just that.
I'm just disappointed to not see Sir Ed Davey zorbing down that hill or paragliding or, I don't know, going for a sail, jumping in the water.
Slip and slide was my favourite.
That was a good one.
Actually, but of course social care, very important issue, something that means a lot to voters, and successive governments haven't been able to deal with it, have they, really?
Well, Theresa May tried, and she lost her majority for trying.
Oh, so there you go. There you go.
Trouble is, it's hugely expensive to deal with. So
hugely.
Either you have to massively raise taxes, and we've already got the highest tax burden for donkey's years, or you're going to have to expropriate people's assets and ask people to sell their homes to pay for their care.
Yes,
or
the
do it in a
bedroom tax.
delayed way, or dementia tax, as it was branded under Theresa May. It's an intractable problem because ultimately, especially in a world where we're going to be restricting visas for social care workers, the pay of social care workers is going to have to go up. It's going to get more expensive. How is it going to get funded? It's already unsustainable.
Well, you know, that's why we elect governments, to try and sort these supposedly intractable problems, eh?
Yeah.
But it is a question for society more broadly, isn't it, and how we look after our elderly relatives. And of course, there's going to be this TV debate tonight between Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak, one to watch.
Yes, absolutely. Rishi Sunak, of course, wanted 6 different one-to-one debates, one for every week of the general election campaign. Sir Keir Starmer's only agreed to doing 2 of them. But tonight is the first one, and it will be a key moment for Rishi Sunak to try and turn things around. So far, the polls have been stubborn. They've been staying about the same point, 20 points difference between the parties. Number 1, are enough people paying attention to tune in and change their minds? And number 2, what on earth could the Prime Minister say to try and make them change their minds?
And, of course, there will be far more people who see clips from tonight's debate than watch the entirety of it. So a lot of the time it really comes down to who can get their views, who can get their policies, who can get their narrative out in the best sort of clickbait almost, really, because that's how people have such short attention spans.
An awful lot of repetition. We're going to be hearing the same thing again and again and again. And if you're after nuanced debate, I'm afraid I might have to let you down early. We're not going to get that from this TV debate. It's not a debate at all. It's a chance for these 2 leaders to get their key sound bites across, because they know that people aren't going to be paying undivided attention to what they're saying. They will hope that 5% of what they say seeps in, because ultimately, the kind of people that will be watching deeply, intently tonight, it's unlikely they'll be changing their minds.
Oh, you think? Not many floating voters watching?
I think political obsessives tend to be people who have already decided, and floating voters tend to be less engaged voters. And so really this is why we so often hear politicians sounding so robotic, repeating the same slogans, the same phrases. Keir Starmer has no plan. Vote for change. We're going to hear those 2 phrases, I bet. I'm going to write a bingo card, actually. I'm going to draw one out on a little piece of paper and try and do Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak bingo, because we're just going to hear the same things.
I mean, they're going to want to catch each other out, aren't they? That's half of it. trying to catch each other out on failed promises or pledges that may not work out or things they've said in the past that don't match up with what they're proposing now.
Well, Oliver Dowden will be playing the role of Keir Starmer in all of Rishi Sunak's prep, and he's been trying to set him off, catch him off. Michael Gove did the same thing for Boris Johnson in the run-up to the 2019 general election. And the whole task of that prep for particularly Boris Johnson in 2019, Gove was always trying to sort of throw him off, set him off, get him into a debate on something that he hadn't prepared to say before. Actually, talk about anything of substance or sort of trip him up. Ultimately, the way these leaders will win is by sticking to their message and not going off-piste, however tempting it might be.
Because they can be game changers. They have been in the past. Remember Nick Clegg? He came to such prominence because of these TV debates, because to a lot of people he came across well. So we shall see if this has any similar effect. But our debate next hour is going to be whether those with the means, the rich if you want to call them that, whether they should pay for their own health care. We're asking this because a record nearly 1 million people are now paying for hospital appointments privately because of the NHS waiting lists. We'll be back in a tick. This is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update. It will turn brighter from the north into this afternoon, but it is going to turn considerably colder, and that's because we have got colder air from the north diving south and eastwards through this evening, so that will bring the brighter conditions to the north. But denoting the difference between that air is a cold front, and that will be bringing some cloud and rain to many southern and central areas of England and Wales through this evening. That will clear to the southeast overnight, and behind it, it will turn much brighter or clearer and drier for much of the UK. However, frequent showers will start to move in across northwestern areas, and it is going to be quite a chilly start to the day on Wednesday. We could see locally a grass frost, but I think most of us just down into the low single figures rurally. And that could mean it's cold enough for some snow showers to fall over the high ground of Scotland, above around 600 metres, and plenty of showers across much of Scotland as well, particularly across northwestern areas. Across eastern Scotland, it should be that much drier, and across Northern Ireland as well. Still some brightness, and eastern parts of northern England should see a fairly bright start to the day. But the best of the sunshine tomorrow morning will be across parts of southern England and the southeast as well, where it should stay fairly dry and bright through much of the day. However, it is going to be a bit of a fresher day. Some cloud will bubble up across southern and central areas into the afternoon. There is a risk of showers across parts of Wales and into the Midlands, but I think the greatest risk is definitely across parts of northwest Scotland, where there'll be quite frequent heavy as well, and there's a risk of thunderstorms. Temperatures only reaching 11 or 12 degrees in the north, and a little bit cooler as well in the south, only highs of around 16 or 17 degrees, which is a few degrees cooler than today. So definitely a fresher day to come tomorrow, and potentially quite an unsettled one across northern areas. It'll stay unsettled into the evening across the parts of the northwest. The theme continues into Wednesday, into Thursday and Friday, but it does look a little bit drier and warmer into the weekend.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
I'm Patrick Christie's. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threats on.
Our job is to do what's in the best interest of our country.
You made my argument for me.
My guest and I tackle the issues that really matter, with a sharp take on every story.
I'm hearing it up and down the country. That was a beginning, not an end.
Patrick Christie's tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's.
It's the Great British Summer Giveaway, and have we got a prize for you? There's a totally tax-free £15,000 in cash to make your summer spectacular. Spend that extra cash however you like. You'll also win a brand new iPhone, Apple AirPods, and if that wasn't enough, a £500 voucher to spend at your favourite UK attraction, so you can enjoy amazing days out this year. For a chance to win the iPhone, treats, and £15,000 cash, text prize to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB06 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 28th of June. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
As he kissed her goodbye with...
Ian Phoenix was in charge of a counter-terrorism group dedicated to bringing peace to Northern Ireland. He was a husband and a father.
He was a real Irishman. He had the twinkly Irish eyes. He enjoyed a good joke. He liked a good glass of wine.
Susan Phoenix first heard of the accident that killed her husband on her car radio.
I was just driving along going, no, no, no. I can still see it. I can still feel it, even 30 years on.
On the 2nd of June, 1994, the Chinook helicopter that was taking them to a peace conference crashed into the side of a mountain on the Mull of Kintyre, killing 4 crew and 25 of the country's top counter-terrorism experts. At a board of inquiry, the Ministry of Defence concluded there was no doubt whatsoever the accident had been caused by the gross negligence of the 2 pilots, Flight Lieutenants Richard Cook and Jonathan Tapper. But there was doubt. Plenty of it. There were no eyewitnesses on that foggy night, no flight data recorder, no voice recorder. It took until 2011 for the Ministry of Defence to admit they had not a shred of evidence. At the time of the crash, systematic errors in the software that controlled the engines had been reported. The MOD had seen its safety budget slashed in the run-up to the accident. In a statement, the Ministry of Defence told GB News, in 2010, the Mull of Kintyre independent review was carried out and the findings were fully accepted. The review did not find new evidence to suggest mechanical failure, and no safety issues with the Chinook Mark II were raised in the report. This weekend, the families have formed the Chinook Justice Campaign. But justice may never come.
The People's Channel.
Well, good afternoon, Britain. It's 1 o'clock on Tuesday, the 4th of June. I'm Emily Carver.
And I'm Tom Harwood.
A new battleground is drawn on immigration. Rishi Sunak vows to bring down migrant numbers by introducing a cap on visas if he wins the general election.
But could this be down to Nigel Farage's shock decision to stand for Parliament for Reform UK? He's now calling for zero migration, net zero.
Meanwhile, Labour has pledged to bring energy security to the UK and end its dependence on fossil fuels from overseas. But a battle is brewing over plans to tax oil and gas even more.
And D-Day veterans mark the journey to France, where they'll be honoured for their part in the liberation of Normandy and Western Europe.
Well, the battle lines are being drawn, aren't they, today, this time on immigration. And it's unsurprising why. Immigration has been at record highs. Question is, do the public trust any party to bring those numbers down?
It's interesting. The Conservative Party has been studiously avoiding talking too much about migration, at least bringing it up. It wasn't on their grid, as it's known in Westminster, until today. They've been talking about things like national service and an extra double, triple lock-on pensions, all of these aimed at older voters, reform-leaning voters, but they haven't grasped the migration nettle until this moment. And the theory was, because this is what David Cameron did in 2015, the theory was don't bring it up too much because ultimately you're never going to be able to go as far as Nigel Farage on that issue. So the theory is actually talk about other things and try and bring back those voters through other means. But clearly, what they've been trying for the last week and a half hasn't had the desired effect.
Well, it's interesting, though, because, of course, Stop the Boats has been one of the, the Prime Minister's big 5 pledges throughout his leadership of the Conservative Party. So it's rather important to talk about, is it not? Immigration, both illegal and legal, but I'm sure tonight's debate there'll be quite a bit on that issue, don't you?
I think there'll definitely be a question on it. I don't know if Keir Starmer will be the person to bring it up, though, because I don't think the Labour Party is particularly far ahead on this issue either. It's one of those big things where the two largest parties in British politics, the two people who could possibly become Prime Minister, neither of them are particularly trusted on it.
Yes, and it'll be interesting to see how much is spoken about defence, another battleground as well between Labour and the Conservatives. Get in touch, gbnews.com/your say. Do you buy into this idea of a cap on worker visas? Do you think it would work? gbnews.com/your say. But let's get to the headlines with Aaron.
Very good afternoon to you. It's 1:03. I'm Aaron Armstrong. The Home Secretary James Cleverly says no other political party, including Reform, is dictating the Conservatives' migration policy. Rishi Sunak has pledged to cap the number of migrant visas handed out each year for those coming to the UK to work or join family. Parliament would then vote on a number recommended by the Migration Advisory Committee. Net migration levels, that's the difference between people leaving and arriving in the UK each year, are now 3 times higher than they were in 2019. James Cleverly says it will give the Tories a more balanced assessment of migration.
So the last couple of years, the figures have been much, much, much too high, including on legal immigration. And there are some people that like that large volume of legal migration for work purposes. But what we're doing now is we're saying in the future, we will balance both the benefits of immigration, of course there are benefits, but also the cost of immigration.
Well, Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer says the Conservatives are responsible for the rising numbers and points out this reverses a decision the party took 4 years ago when it reformed the immigration system as part of Brexit.
The Conservatives have let immigration get out of control. We've got record numbers of people coming to this country, and they've now said they're going to have a visa cap. They've not said what the number is, so they've got a visa cap without a cap. We did have a visa cap before. Rishi Sunak argued to get rid of it, which they did in 2020, and now they're going back to it but without a number. It is utter chaos.
Well, more than 200 migrants have arrived in the UK on small boats this morning after making the journey from northern France. GB News can reveal 4 small boats have made it to UK waters since the early hours. It comes after 63 migrants managed to cross yesterday. It was the first successful crossing for a week and takes the total number of illegal migrants who've come to the UK by small boat this year to more than 10,500, a 38% increase on the same time last year. Sir Ed Davey says his plan to invest in personal care will help rescue the NHS, which is on its knees. Lib Dems say they'd introduce free day-to-day care in England for adults in need, including for the elderly and disabled, and they've pledged to increase carers' wages. The Lib Dems say the £3.7 billion cost of their social care plan will be paid for by reversing tax cuts to big banks. Sir Ed, who cares for his disabled son, says the investment will relieve pressure on the NHS.
We need more people to be supported in care, to look after loved ones who are either waiting to be discharged from hospital or so they don't have to go into hospital. If we do that, we rescue our NHS. Our NHS is on its knees, and one of the main reasons it's on its knees is people haven't invested in social care and they haven't looked after family carers, and our package today does just that.
A ferry carrying D-Day veterans to France for the 80th anniversary commemorations left Portsmouth earlier this morning. The Mont Saint-Michel ferry was accompanied by a number of Royal Navy vessels. There was Trumpeter, Medusa, Basher, as well as the minehunter HMS Catastock and a training ship Royalist, plus a couple of tugboats as well. So those are the pictures leaving Portsmouth Harbour. Meanwhile, over off the coast of France, this replica landing craft was at Omaha Beach carrying US troops, part of D-Day commemorations in Normandy. Omaha, one of 2 beaches taken by US forces 80 years ago. And Kenneth Nishiori told us about the impact D-Day had on his grandfather, who took part in the landing.
I'm amazed that he was even actually here because it was an experience he never talked about. Like a lot of veterans, you rarely heard any war stories. And I knew he was in the Army, but that was it. Growing up as a kid, I'd never heard any stories It wasn't until I got a box of letters from my mom, from granddaddy to grandma, talking about his time in France.
DNA tests have revealed 3 babies have been abandoned by the same parents over the past 7 years. One of the children was about an hour old when she was found abandoned in a shopping bag in a park in East London earlier this year in sub-zero conditions. Her 2 siblings, both boys, were discovered in similar circumstances in 2019 and 2017. The details have emerged after reporting restrictions were lifted. A police investigation into the parents' identity is ongoing. 10 fire engines and around 70 firefighters have been tackling a major blaze in East London. It broke out in a 10-floor construction site in Canning Town earlier. No reports of any injuries. Police in the area have told people to keep their doors and windows closed, and an investigation to find the cause is underway. We'll be back with more news at the top of the next hour, or you can get more right now by signing up to GB News Alerts. QR code is on your screen and the details are on our website too. Now it's back to Tom and Emily.
Right, it's 1:08. Good afternoon, Britain. Now, Thursday this week will mark 80 years since the largest amphibious landing in military history. More than 150,000 Allied troops risked their lives by storming Nazi-occupied beaches in Normandy.
Well, today, veterans are gathered to travel to France to commemorate this event that was a turning point in the war.
Well, looking ahead to the anniversary is our Home and Security editor, Mark White, who is in Portsmouth for us. Mark, what exactly is taking place today?
Yeah, good afternoon to you both. Today we had a small flotilla escorting a Brittany ferry out from Portsmouth Harbour, heading across to Normandy today with 30 veterans on board. And I say a small flotilla, it was still impressive. Royal Navy minesweeper, a couple of patrol boats and some World War II era motor torpedo boats, as well as a sailing ship and some escorting tugs, all there to take this Brittany Ferries vessel out into the English Channel for that journey across to Normandy for the very poignant services that of course will be taking place this evening and again tomorrow across the Normandy coast. And 30 veterans have made it onto that ferry. Other veterans have stayed here in Portsmouth for the events that will be taking place here in Southsea, where I am tomorrow. Events that will include the King attending, along with thousands of members of the public, veterans and the military. A little earlier, as we watched that ferry go out from Portsmouth Harbour, I spoke to some of the people that had gathered early in the morning to see that flotilla leave. This is what they said.
And it's just a privilege to be here today with the freedom that we all have and that a lot of people maybe take for granted a little bit.
Fantastic day. I think more people should be here, really.
Really kind of loud, actually, and really cool.
It's good to see that young lad very impressed and defying these surveys suggesting that less than half of young people even know what D-Day was. Well, many thousands will be out to mark what is clearly a very special day in terms of commemorating D-Day, with 80 years having passed. And yesterday I had the privilege to meet some of those veterans. We were at Southwark House, which is just north of Portsmouth, and it was there, the epicentre, the nerve centre of the maritime operation to send some 7,000 vessels across the UK. They could only dream of such an endeavour today. It's the biggest maritime operation ever in the history of the world and will never be repeated on that scale. Some 1,200 warships among them. And among the veterans I had the privilege of speaking to was George Chandler. He was in the Royal Navy at the time, just 19 years old. He was on a motor torpedo boat that was charged with guarding the fleet from German attack. And he was up at Omaha Beach, one of 5 beaches where the Allies landed. That was effectively an American landing point, and he still recalls, even though he is blind and he is pretty deaf, he still really recalls with incredible clarity the horror that he saw on the 6th of June 1944.
I was 19 at the time. These kids were younger than me, I know they were. Every time I talk to somebody about D-Day, I'm there.
Well, as you say, every time he thinks about D-Day now, he is there 80 years on, and he still remembers those events with such clarity. And no wonder the events that unfolded there were so horrific that so many Allied forces, including many thousands of British personnel, were killed in the operation to push forward into France.
Thank you so much, Mark White, our Home and Security Editor there in Portsmouth. It's always absolutely fascinating to hear the stories from veterans who lived through experiences that hopefully none of us ever will have to. Quite incredible, moving as well. A lot of them don't talk about it for years and years and years, and then it all comes out. All of those memories, flashbacks, everything that happened.
And it's so important to make sure that we document it all. 80 years on Thursday since D-Day, of course.
Incredible.
As time goes on, we're going to have fewer of those stories within living memory. So hugely important work Mark's doing there.
Indeed it is. But back to politics, immigration has become a key battleground in today's general election campaigning.
Yes, Rishi Sunak has vowed an annual cap on visas as a way of limiting the number of migrants coming into the country. But he hasn't said at what level the cap should be set, saying it should be varied year to year. Let's get the details with our political correspondent, Catherine Forster, in Westminster. Because, Catherine, I'm sure that a lot of people will be raising an eyebrow at this idea of a cap, but not saying where the cap should be.
Well, exactly, because they've been burnt before giving numbers, haven't they? Reduced to the tens of thousands net migration. They said that for many, many years. And then Boris Johnson in 2019 pledged to get it down below 230,000. And what we are at now? 680,000. It was up at 750,000, so triple what it was back in 2019. So no, they're not giving a number on this cap, but James Cleverly, the Home Secretary, is saying it is a cap which will get smaller and smaller every year over the next 5 years. But of course, will people believe them? Because it is the Conservatives that have been in charge for 14 years. And since we left the European Union, it is directly because of choices that the government has made that migration went up to that 750,000. Absolutely unprecedented, never happened before at any point in our history. Now, worth saying too that Labour also say they want to bring legal migration down, but yes, they haven't given any number either, nor do I expect they will. And in the GBNews poll that came out yesterday, people, I think it was something like only 4% of people trust Labour very much to get migration down, and just under half don't really trust them at all. So I think with both the big parties, there is a lack of trust among voters because they've seen migration rocket, and despite the words from the Conservatives, they haven't seen it go down. And meanwhile, enter stage left, Nigel Farage, talking about an immigration election, pledging to get to net zero migration, and his entrance likely to have quite an effect on this campaign.
Yes, very interesting indeed. Thank you very much. Catherine Forster, our political correspondent there from College Green, outside Westminster. I mean, interestingly, the Conservatives, as I understand it, they're going to be asking the Independent Migration Advisory Committee to recommend an annual cap. So it's not quite a completely 100% political decision, is it? If they're asking for advice on it.
Issue.
Yes. One might ask, why is it up to the Independent Migration Advisory Committee to necessarily suggest a number? Surely that's a choice for a party leader.
Although Parliament could, of course, vote. They could reject the recommendation.
They could reject it.
Although we have seen how powerful these independent bodies often are. I mean, legally, the government didn't need to go for an OBR assessment of a budget or indeed a mini-budget, but the markets took a very different view when they did.
Well, quite.
Shall we turn to the Labour Party, though? Because today they're focusing on energy security and making Britain less dependent on what it calls rogue states to provide energy resources. I presume by rogue states it means the United States of America, from whom we get a lot of natural gas, perhaps even Norway or ourselves, who we also get lots of fossil fuels out of the North Sea from. But should we talk to Sarah Jones, Shadow Minister for Industry and Decarbonisation? Because, Sarah, it's fair to say it's not just rogue states that provide fossil fuels, is it?
Of course not. You're absolutely right. But look, we have an international price-setting system. So what happened when we had, for example, the invasion of Ukraine? Everybody came out of Russia in terms of getting energy from Russia. And what happened is that made the prices spiral because globally people were reliant on Russia. We get a lot of our oil from Russia, we did, but not only from there, as you say, we get it from Norway, from other places. But what that removal of that Russian source meant was that the price for everybody rocketed because we hadn't made ourselves more energy secure. And what the OBR have said in a kind of risk assessment that they've done is that if we don't do something about this situation, this can happen again. There will be another shock and another, and each one will put thousands of pounds onto people's bills, and it will affect our GDP, it will affect our debt. So we need to tackle this as a problem as a country. I hope that makes sense, but it's not just where we're getting the energy from, it's this global pricing system that knocks all of it.
Where exactly are the Labour Party currently with windfall taxes, specifically on the North Sea oil and gas? Because as I'm sure you've seen, the Confederation of British Industry today is warning that raising those windfall taxes could harm inward investment to this country. I'm sure you don't want to see that harmed. They also say that there may be knock-on effects on other industries. Also know that many of the trade unions are concerned about job losses in this sector. So are Labour still going to persevere with raising that windfall tax, which I believe already stands at 75%?
So we're going to extend it, so it is taxed for longer. So we will raise more money from that windfall tax. It's a time-limited tax, though. It's not going to be there forever. It's going to be there while the companies are making a massive profit. When that profit comes down, the windfall tax stops. But look, this is complex, right? I'm not going to pretend it's not. We have lots of people who are employed getting oil and gas in Scotland in particular, and we know those numbers are going to reduce over time, and they have reduced a lot over the last few years. What we want to do is to say, look, we know what the energy consumption is going to be of the future. We know where the job opportunities are for the future. So let's, as a government, invest alongside the private sector in floating offshore wind, in solar, tidal, in nuclear, all of these different energy sources, so that we can transition people who are working in oil and gas into the new energies of the future, and we can make sure we grow our economy. So this doesn't work unless you have a proper industrial strategy, unless you have the National Well Fund, where we're going to be investing in nuclear and in other sectors. And it doesn't work unless you have Great British Energy, which will be there as this publicly owned energy company, which will be investing in and creating energy across the country. You have to do all those things together. We think we have this huge opportunity. Other people will do it if we don't. We'll end up buying this energy from other countries if we don't produce it ourselves. But
one of the biggest...
The windfall tax will be there until those profits reduce.
One of the biggest issues that we face in our domestic energy supply market is, of course, regulation. planning regulation that prevents solar farms being constructed, onshore wind farms being constructed, even offshore wind farms that only take 2 or 3 years to build the turbines, but 10 years to get through planning and environmental impact assessments. Why on earth do we have environmental impact assessments and all that red tape for what are supposed to be pro-environmental projects? Spain has massively simplified how they deliver renewable energy without the need for the same impact assessments that we put on those. Is that a model to follow? Can we deregulate all of that red tape? Would you commit to following what Spain has done?
So we do commit to reforming the planning process and speeding up the connections to the grid. Absolutely, we do. Now, we do that in a number of ways. Firstly, the grid, which has to link up to the energy that we start creating in offshore wind, as you say, we have to have the connections that can then take the power across the country. At the moment, there are many people on the waiting list, people being told they have to wait 10, 15 years before they'll get that connection. We are going to have a national strategy that will say, well, which are the important ones? Which are the ones that are crucial for our energy security? Which are the ones that are ready to go? And let's prioritise those.
How will that be decided? How will that be decided? Because, of course, something can look like a fantastic project on paper, but then a newer technology comes along, or a better technology comes along, or it doesn't work out in the way you hope. Who's deciding this?
Yeah. Well, what's happened in the past is you have different companies that own different parts of the system, and they just do whatever they do, and the people that come to them first get sorted first, and everybody else has to wait. So the government, to be fair, set up through the energy bill a new national body that looks at some of these things strategically. We're going to improve that and build on it so that you have a proper national strategy that goes, we know that we want investment in floating offshore wind. It's a new technology, it's fabulous. We are uniquely placed to be the leaders in the world because we're an island and we can use this technology. We want to encourage investors for this. So we will say where there is investment coming in to do floating offshore wind, they should get priority. So it's not easy, I'm not pretending it is, but there is a way to look at this strategically, and there is a way to change the planning system. So on onshore wind, for example, which you mentioned before, the Conservatives have basically stopped that through the planning system. We think we actually could be creating a lot of jobs and a lot of energy and bringing our bills down if we did more.
Of course, there is a reason why the planning system has gunged up everything, and that's very often these projects face local opposition. And that's why you sometimes get this lawfare and this exploited red tape, whether it's judicial reviews or forcing newt counting, and, as I say, these environmental impact assessments as well. How are you going to override local opposition? Are you going to buy people off, or are you going to reform just how much red tape there's actually there, and particularly an answer I'm after on those environmental impact assessments?
Well, look, you have to have environmental impact assessments on, say, for example, we want lots of offshore wind. The Crown Estate, which own and manage a lot of the kind of sea around the island that we live in, they are looking at what's the marine implications for everything that we want to do. So you have to look at those things. We want to make sure we're protecting nature, protecting the environment around us. But planning is a huge problem. You're absolutely right. And part of it is because we don't have as many
planners. You're saying we still need all of these environmental impact assessments. How are you going to fix it if you're going to keep that red tape?
Because the red tape isn't just environmental impact assessments, it's loads of other things. If I could just build on the point that you were making about public views as well, I think this is really important. We can't be saying to people, we need to build this infrastructure in your area, and you're getting nothing in return for it. We have to have an offer. And Rachel Reeves has said, where we do need to build infrastructure, because it's good for our country, you know, we need to thank people for that by giving them something back, whether that's cheaper energy bills in their area, or whether that's a fund where local organisations, local communities can decide what to do with that fund. There has to be a proper communication here. We don't want all of our planning, as you said, decided in the high courts. That's not democratic. That's not taking people with you at all. So there are models, and there are some organisations that have ideas about this, about how you take people with you where you do need that development and how you use the best technology and the best resources that you can, so that the development is as least disruptive as it can possibly be. We're making a lot of offshore, onshore wind in Scotland. We're going to have to move it down the country, otherwise we're still buying it into London, which is what we do at the moment. We kind of buy it in through the pipes into London when we could be producing it all in Scotland.
Well, thank you very much. We'll have to leave it there, but thank you very much. Sarah Jones, Shadow Minister for Industry and Decarbonisation.
Interesting stuff. I wonder how practicable this stuff is, because whenever there's planning reform...
Sounds rather bureaucratic.
Liz trusted it, tried to do it, Boris Johnson tried to do it, David Cameron tried to do it. They all met lots of opposition. Well, still to come, people are turning away from the NHS for private healthcare. That's according to new figures. So we're going to be asking, should better-off people contribute, pay towards their medical treatment to leave some of that NHS space for those who can't afford it? You're watching Good Afternoon Britain on GB News.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Almost half of those seeking to have an affair are happier with their job than with their primary relationship. But what exactly does a cheater do for a living?
Well, medical assistants and nurses, surprisingly, top the lists of professions for female cheaters, and it's jobs in IT or tech for male cheaters, which I think is less of a surprise.
No.
This is all according to a survey by the dating site Ashley Madison.
OK, so why do people cheat? To answer this, we're joined now by broadcaster and psychotherapist Lucy Beresford. Good morning, Lucy.
Morning, Lucy.
So, is it OK of me to say naughty nurses in this day and age? Am I going to get cancelled for that?
You're out.
Yeah, I'm out.
Been cancelled.
See ya.
There's the door.
But yes, you're talking about the caring professions, and I think it's very appropriate.
I'm surprised by that.
Women, well, because they're very nurturing, very loving, very giving, whereas the males who are in tech and IT, very strategic.
Is there a link between high-pressure jobs, maybe nurses infamously, you know, they're working long hours, underpaid, stressed out? Is there a link between jobs of that nature and cheating, maybe as a relief?
Absolutely. Is it just about sex, or is it about emotional connection? Is it about emotional validation? And increasingly, people are discovering that their primary relationship is just not a place where they feel safe.
This survey found that personality didn't actually come into it that much. It was about half and half if you're an introvert or an extrovert that you'd be likely to have an affair.
I think that's right. And I think that just speaks to the fact that all people want to have a good emotional connection. So it doesn't matter whether you're really social or whether you're someone who has to recharge your batteries in private time, that actually we only ever want three things in life. We want to feel safe, we want to feel loved, but we also want to feel heard. And in increasingly a number of marriages and long-term relationships, we get into grooves, we get into ruts, and we stop hearing our partner, we stop listening to them, and they stop listening to us.
The People's Channel.
In the GB newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, GB News brings you accurate reporting of the day's topical agenda.
When the news breaks, wherever and whenever it's happening,
we'll be there.
This is GB News,
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get the book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Neil Oliver, every Sunday night at 6 p.m. on GB News. And if an hour is not nearly enough for you, go to gbnews.com for special extended episodes online every Friday at 9 p.m, where we can truly get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on. GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's 1:31. Welcome back. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB newsroom. Let's get you up to date with the headlines. And we start with some breaking news. Medical procedures have been cancelled or redirected to other NHS providers following a cyber attack on major hospitals in London. Staff at King's College Hospital, Guy's and St Thomas's and primary care services in the capital have been told their sites have been hit by a major IT incident. Now, health trusts are reporting it has had a big impact on the delivery of its services, with blood transfusions particularly affected. It's a developing story. We will bring you more throughout the afternoon as soon as we get it here on GB News. Let's turn to election campaigning. Sir Keir Starmer has dismissed Rishi Sunak's plans for an annual cap on visas, saying the government's lost control of net migration. Under the plan, MPs would vote on visa numbers for those coming to the UK to work or to join family, based on recommendations from the Migration Advisory Committee. The government says it's about getting a balanced assessment of both the advantages and costs of migration. While net levels are now 3 times higher than they were in 2019, and the Labour leader says the government's responsible after it removed the cap 4 years ago with the introduction of a post-Brexit skills workers visa.
The Conservatives have let immigration get out of control. We've got record numbers of people coming to this country, and they've now said they're going to have a visa cap. They've not said what the number is. They've got a visa cap without a cap. We did have a visa cap before. Rishi Sunak argued to get rid of it, which they did in 2020, and now they're going back to it but without a number. It is utter chaos.
Well, the Liberal Democrats are promising free personal care for adults in need, including the elderly and disabled. Sir Ed Davey says he wants to pay carers an extra £2 an hour above the national living wage. And he says investment in the care sector would ultimately benefit the NHS. It's going to cost, he thinks, £3.7 billion. And Sir Ed Davey says that will be funded by reversing tax cuts to big banks. Now, the Lib Dem leader, who himself is a carer for his disabled son, has described the issue as deeply personal. And he says his party believes provision of care should be based on need rather than the ability to pay. Now, if you want to get more on all of our stories, we'll have it in our later bulletins, one at the top of the next hour, or you can sign up to our alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen, or you go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Cheers Britannia Wine Club proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Quick snapshot of the markets. The pound buys you $1.2765, €1.1747 euros. Gold will cost £1,828.97 per ounce. And the FTSE 100 is trading at 8,235 points.
Cheers Britannia Wine Club proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Hello, good morning. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update. It's going to turn a little bit colder from the north today as a band of rain and cloud will push southeastwards. That's a cold front that's sinking southeastwards through the day. Behind it, we've got a dive of much colder air coming in from the north, so there will be a different feel to the weather by this afternoon across parts of Northern Ireland and much of Scotland. So we'll turn a bit brighter as the rain and cloud does move through, but there's a risk of some quite blustery showers as well, and quite a brisk breeze. That rain will push into parts of Wales, northern England, perhaps as far south as the southwest through this afternoon. I think most of us will just see quite a lot of cloud around. Ahead of that band, still some brightness, potentially highs of around 21, 22 degrees in the south and east, but most of us are going to notice a bit of a downturn in the temperatures. Some of those showers across the highest ground of Scotland could fall as snow because it is cold enough. It's fairly unusual for this time of year. As I said, it will turn a bit brighter once that rain and cloud does clear through across parts of Northern England, Northern Ireland to end the day, and it will reside across parts of central England into the southwest and southeast by this evening. So I think despite the sunshine in this afternoon across the southeast, the cloud and rain will arrive later on today. That will push south and eastwards through the night, and behind it will turn much clearer, so quite a clear and fairly cold night to come, much colder than it has been lately. You can see temperatures dipping down into the low single figures rurally. There is a risk of a touch of grass frost locally across some places. Showers will still continue across the far northwest, across parts of Scotland, but most of us should stay dry into tomorrow morning with the best of the sunshine across southern and eastern areas. Bit of cloud will bubble up into the afternoon and showers will develop across parts of Wales, northern England, but they're going to be most frequent across across parts of Northern Ireland and northwest Scotland in particular, where there is a further risk of some hill snow. And for all of us, it's going to be feeling cooler with temperatures a little below average.
The latest GB News travel.
Hello to you, I'm Jules. Buckley, West Yorkshire, seeing queues for the M62. Now, a lane shut both sides of the carriageway between Rushworth Moor Junction 22 and Huddersfield at 23. There's emergency barrier repairs. It follows an earlier collision, takes about half an hour to get through. Now, at the moment, northbound M1 struggling at junction 31 for Sheffield. 2 out of 4 lanes combed off there at the scene of a collision. 3 lanes are closed off northbound up the M6 in Cheshire, Middlewich 18 up to Knutsford 19. There's a big queue to just before 16 for Stoke and Crewe. A 5-lorry collision there, also worth noting. The entry slip at junction 18 is also closed. And in London, the North Circular northbound, the A406 shut from Brunswick Road up towards the A40 at the Hanger Lane gyratory. Big queues there due to an overturned lorry. And that's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Right, it's 1:37. Good afternoon, Britain. Now, demand for private healthcare has risen to record levels in the UK, up 7% from 2022.
Yes, patients are increasingly turning away from the NHS as it deals with long waiting lists and backlogs. But is this something that we should perhaps be welcoming?
I mean, it's crucially not just that it's up 7% since 2022, but around 900,000 people in the UK. Nearly 1 million people are now seeking private hospital treatment. That was last year, could be even higher this year.
But is this a way of getting more cash into our health system? And should those who earn more perhaps be looking at getting private healthcare so that the NHS is there for the rest of us? Or does that undermine what the NHS is? Well, delighted to be joined now by the former medical director and chief medical officer at private health provider Bupa, Dr. Andrew Valence Owen, and lead communicator at We Own It, John Bosco Nawobo. Let's start with you, Dr. Valence Owen. Why should we be more relaxed about this potentially?
I think we should encourage people who can afford it to go into the private sector at this particular time. I mean, people have different reasons for not doing that, but one of them traditionally has been that they just want to support their NHS. Well, in this case, supporting their NHS, if they can afford it, could mean going to the private sector, taking the load off the NHS, which is a big argument for the private sector at the moment. So, yes, I would encourage people, and, you know, we might even incentivize people in Australia. As you may know, there are rebates, tax rebates for people for private insurance. They give and they take away, though, because people of a certain income who don't use their public sector get charged. So it's a bit of a give of one and take away with the other, but nevertheless.
Isn't it a bit unfair, though, if you're a private earner, you're not only paying into the NHS for everyone else, but then you're also expected then to pay privately for your own healthcare at great cost. I mean, does that break down the social contract somewhat?
Well, the social contract is pretty broken at the moment, Emily, really, in terms of the NHS. It's in a dire straits. And I mean, I'm an absolute supporter of the NHS and deeply concerned about it. But I think the more people who can go and find other sources, you know, of treatment, the better. I mean, the private sector itself has been doing a lot of work for the NHS. We saw that particularly during COVID, where they took a lot of NHS treatment patients at cost, you know, at NHS prices. And increasingly, private hospitals do have NHS contracts. So already, NHS patients are being treated that way. But I agree, there should be some incentive for more wealthy people to actually go privately and pay for it.
Well, John Bosco, let's throw that over to you. After all, Australia is a country we hear a lot about in terms of healthcare. Indeed, NHS practitioners are often saying perhaps we'll go and work in Australia. Well, Australia has a tax penalty for wealthy people who don't take out private healthcare. Surely that's been helping their system?
So I think that this is a bit of phantom problem in the sense that the NHS has always, or rather Great Britain has always had a situation where people who have money are able to purchase some additional kind of health coverage in the private sector. That has always been the case for the 75 years that we've had the NHS. What we are seeing now, and what's the much bigger social, moral problem for us, is the fact that a lot of people who cannot afford it are being forced to go to the private sector. So we're seeing people set up GoFundMes, we're seeing people beg family for money, we're seeing people dig into their retirement funds in order to ameliorate a problem that they have at the moment, that they're afraid they can't keep on waiting for the NHS to see them on. So that's the real problem. And if we want to talk about the real problem, then we need to talk about the real solutions, right? The real solutions at the moment is really building up the capacity within the NHS. Just to illustrate the fact that the use of the private sector by the NHS is not going to make much of a dent to the 7.6 million waiting list we have. Spire Healthcare is by far the biggest private hospital chain in Britain. They have 39 hospitals. Last year, they treated a total of 1 million patients. You know in what time the NHS treats 1 million patients? 36 hours. These companies are not going to make a difference. The real difference is investing into the NHS, investing into its staff, building up its capacity.
Yeah.
That's how you fix the list.
I mean, you're absolutely right. Dr. Valence Owen, people aren't choosing to go private necessarily just because they want to. It's because they're stuck on NHS waiting lists and they're told by doctors that they need to get it sorted now, whatever their condition is. And you get told by the NHS, oh, it's going to be 4 weeks till you see a specialist, and then another 8 weeks till you get your scan, and then another 4 weeks till you hear about what's on the scan and what the problem is, and it goes on and on and on. People just go private because they can get it done quickly.
Yeah, well, I mean, I absolutely agree. That's a huge problem, and we have to work. I mean, I agree with my colleague who's just been speaking, actually. I mean, I think there's a huge amount we need to do to get rid of that waiting list, and it has to be done within the NHS. The private sector can help, but even the private sector is now getting full to capacity. For private patients, so their ability to help the NHS. So we really, whether it's just funding or whether it's greater efficiencies or a whole range of things, it should be the very top priority for a new government coming in to really tackle the NHS. And it's more than one. There are so many issues around it. I'm not going to call for a royal commission because that would take another 10 years. But it needs more of a business focus, less political involvement. And you know, I think it can be tackled, but we have to really get on with it.
Of course, John Bosco, there's been a lot of money going into the NHS, particularly in the last few years. I mean, £50 billion if we're going to take the last 14 years uplift in real terms, inflation adjusted. That's about a more than a third increase, almost 40% increase in the real terms budget of the health service. But it doesn't feel like it's had that increase.
So, of course, we are dealing with the repercussions of the pandemic. And I should just kind of put that, the uplift that you're talking about into a bit more context. The Health Foundation carried out analysis comparing different countries across the world. We spend per head in total £40 billion less on the NHS than the French spend on their healthcare system.
We spend about the same as the Netherlands.
Sorry?
We spend about the same as the Netherlands.
Well, I'm sure we spend, actually we spend a bit less than the Netherlands, according to the Health Foundation analysis as well. We spend £73 billion less than the Germans. And the result of this, obviously, partly is that those countries have a slightly less efficient healthcare system. They have to employ people to manage insurance systems. But I think that the significant problem is the fact that we are investing far less than we actually need to invest in the system. There was a British Medical Association analysis that found that if we had invested in the NHS at the same rate as we invested between 1955 and 2010, if we had invested at that rate between 2010 and now, we would have invested something like £322 billion more than we actually.
It also has to be used efficiently And,
agree,
you know, whenever a
absolutely,
discussion is had about the NHS, people always call for more investment. Less is said about how to make sure that money goes far because, you know, the people of Britain are not made of money. And, of course, the population has boomed so much as well at the same time. Thank you so much to both of you. That was a great discussion. We had Dr. Andrew Vallance-Owen from Bupa and the lead campaigner at We Own It, John Bosco Nwobo. Thank you very much indeed for your time.
Well, coming up, a charity is raising concerns over the decline in handwriting amongst young people.
This makes me sad, this one.
But is it an inevitability in this day and age? Well, we'll have that discussion next.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
Sadiq Khan has criticised the government's failure to ban zombie knives, labelling it a betrayal of safety. He's calling on James Cleverly to fast-track legislation and bring forward a ban on the sale of these weapons. GB News reporter Charlie Peters has purchased some of these and brought them into the studio with us this morning. How easy was it to buy one of these?
Well, I mean, it was extremely easy. They have been banned several times in recent years, but I was able to purchase these two blades, a twin set of 20-inch blades under the zombie knife definition, which is over 8 inches, a sharp point, a cutting edge, a serrated side, and indeed gaps in the middle. The original ban, announced in 2016, said that a zombie knife had to have threatening language. As you can see, this blade has no threatening language or images on it. And so more recently...
But it's just threatening itself. I mean, it's quite frightening looking, isn't it?
That's why the definition was updated this year in January by the Home Secretary, James Cleverly, who said that a zombie-style knife needed to be banned, removing the definition of threatening language or emblems on it. Now, 5 different Home Secretaries have tried to ban these blades over 15 different times in recent years. Sarah Newton, the Home Office Minister in 2016, first brought out this proposed ban. And then a year later, there was another announcement from Home Secretary Amber Rudd, and they pushed forward again 3 years later to try and clamp down on these weapons, noting that knife crime was soaring. In particular, the threat posed by them in gang crime and gang warfare, really, in London, and more recently in West Yorkshire, that has attracted so much of concern. Knife crime has soared by a staggering 80% since 2015.
The People's Channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the argument. We get rid of the disrespect, and then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry. Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 10 to 2. Now, a charity has warned that children's futures are at risk due to the drastic drop in numbers enjoying writing in their free time.
Yes, the survey now suggests that fewer than 3 in 10 young people aged between 8 and 18 put pen to paper anymore. Now, of course, writing by hand is known to have important cognitive benefits for both children and adults alike. So is this doing damage?
Well, joining us now is a specialist teacher, Michelle Stone, because, Michelle, I suppose it sort of stands to reason if children are now doing so much more work on computers, writing exams on computers, spending less time writing, I suppose, is an inevitability.
It can be, although I think this is part of a much bigger conversation. We know that children are generally writing less. And it could be due to the sharp rise in screen use. It could be partly due to COVID, where lots of lessons were taught online quite suddenly. It could also be due to the fact that children perhaps don't see that enjoyment in writing so much anymore, possibly because they're very much pushed, particularly in Key Stage 2, to achieve certain standards for the Year 6 SAT assessments. So it's just part of a much bigger conversation.
I mean, it's worrying to me to see how stark the drop is, really. 2010, it was upwards of 50% who wrote in their free time. Now it's down to fewer than 3 in 10. I mean, this is quite a drastic drop. I mean, are we going to lose the art of handwriting?
Obviously, as part of the National Handwriting Association, we would hope not. And we know that there's a huge part of learning that comes from handwriting with an implement as opposed to learning something on screen. So what we know is that when children are handwriting, they're more likely to retain information and be able to recall it. Unfortunately, what we've had is, combined with COVID, we've also had a huge rise in the use of smartphones amongst children and young people. So it could be again as a result of that, because children are not able to be bored as much. They're much more expected to be online. So it's just a whole, everything feeds into everything else. And we also know that children don't see as much writing in their homes as they did perhaps 10, 20, 30 years ago. We know that children's physical development has a huge impact on their handwriting ability, which can then in turn impact their self-esteem when they're writing. So because we know that children are doing much less exercise than they were, again, in the 1970s, 1980s, it's 50% less physical exercise for the children of today. And that has a huge impact on their motor skills, so their fine motor skills, which would impact handwriting.
But Michelle, what sort of writing would we be expecting children to be doing it in their spare time? If they're texting their friends or sort of... I don't know what writing I would do in my spare time.
What? Loads of writing.
What would you write in your spare time?
A poem.
Well, just... Really?
Yes, Michelle, you would write a poem or a little letter or annotate a diagram or all sorts of things. Spelling.
Absolutely. So I know for myself, as a mum and as a teacher, I write at home, I write shopping lists, I make sure my children have access to pens, paper, etc. And we know as well that environmental circumstances can have an impact on children if they don't see writing happening.
It can be as simple as a shopping... See, I would have counted that as work, or perhaps domestic chores.
Thank you very much indeed,
time,
Michelle Stone, specialist teacher. After the break, I'm going to tell you about all the different ways you can write.
I look forward to it.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update. It will turn brighter from the north into this afternoon, but it is going to turn considerably colder. And that's because we have got colder air from the north diving south and eastwards through this evening. So that will bring the brighter conditions to the north. But denoting the difference between that air is a cold front, and that will be bringing some cloud and rain to many southern and central areas of England and Wales through this evening. That will clear to the southeast overnight, and behind it, it will turn much brighter or clearer and drier for much of the UK. However, frequent showers will start to move in across northwestern areas, and it is going to be quite a chilly start to the day on Wednesday. We could see locally a grass frost, but I think most of us just down into the low single figures rurally. And that could mean it's cold enough for some snow showers to fall over the high ground of Scotland, above around 600 metres, and plenty of showers across much of Scotland as well, particularly across northwestern areas. Across eastern Scotland, it should be that much drier, and across Northern Ireland as well. Still some brightness, and eastern parts of northern England should see a fairly bright start to the day. But the best of the sunshine tomorrow morning will be across parts of southern England and the southeast as well, where it should stay fairly dry and bright through much of the day. However, it is going to be a bit of a fresher day. Some cloud will bubble up across southern and central areas into the afternoon. There is a risk of showers across parts of Wales and into the Midlands, but I think the greatest risk is definitely across parts of northwest Scotland, where they'll be quite frequent, heavy as well, and there's a risk of thunderstorms. Temperatures only reaching 11 or 12 degrees in the north, and a little bit cooler as well in the south, only highs of around 16 or 17 degrees, which is a few degrees cooler than today. So definitely a fresher day to come tomorrow, and potentially be quite an unsettled one across northern areas. It'll stay unsettled into the evening across the parts of the northwest. The theme continues into Wednesday, into Thursday and Friday, but it does look a little bit drier and warmer into the weekend.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
We've got summer sewn up with an incredible trio of treats, and you could win them. First, there's a fabulous £15,000 in tax-free cash to ensure this summer is special. What would you spend that on? Next, you'll also receive the latest iPhone 15 and a set of Apple AirPods. And finally, £500 to spend at your favourite UK attraction. Fun in the sun could be on us. For a chance to win the iPhone, treats and £15,000 cash, text prize to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or post your name and number to GB06 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 28th of June. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
GB News is Britain's election channel.
And when the big stories break, we're tackling them on Britain's newsroom. When we disagree, and we disagree a lot, it's even livelier than normal.
We don't disagree that much.
We do. His comedy, though, is revolting. I knew her, and unlike you. That explains Beverly Turner's temperament.
It's a bit frosty in here, isn't it?
He'll have one of me one day.
Yeah, for dartball practice. Britain's newsroom on GB News. Weekdays, 9:30 a.m.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the argument. We get rid of the disrespect, and then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry, Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
We're GB News, and we come from a proud tradition of British journalism.
That's why I'm so excited to be here. It's something so new.
The first news channel to be launched in Britain in over 30 years.
Launched to represent the views of the British people.
To go where other broadcasters refuse to go.
How did you find out about the story in the first place?
Launched with one aim.
To be the fearless champion of Britain.
It's an absolutely fantastic atmosphere here.
This is GB News. The People's
Channel. GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 2 o'clock on Tuesday, the 4th of June. I'm Tom Harwood.
And I'm Emily Carver.
A cyber attack has hit patient care at some major hospitals in London. Some procedures have been cancelled or redirected. This is a breaking and developing story, and we'll have all the details.
And a new general election battleground is drawn on immigration this time. Rishi Sunak vows to bring down migrant numbers by introducing a cap on visas.
Meanwhile, the Labour Party has pledged to bring energy security to the UK, ending dependence on fossil fuels from overseas. But a battle is brewing over plans to tax oil and gas even more.
And D-Day veterans make the journey to France, where they will be honoured for their part in the liberation of Normandy and Western Europe.
Now, I think Emily and I have a different definition of what work is.
Yeah, I'm just telling Tom, we were talking about handwriting before, and Tom seemed to think that no one would ever pick up a pen or a pencil as a child unless it was homework. And I'm telling him, I'm telling you that a lot of young children, particularly from age 4 to 12, if I cast my mind back, you're writing little poems, you're annotating little pictures, you're maybe writing in a little diary entry, you're maybe making something up, a story or something, or I don't know, anything, a little post-it that you might want to put somewhere with something written on it. If we lose that entirely, then it's very sad. And do you know when I stopped doing that? When I got a screen in front of me.
I'm sure I wrote post-it notes. I'm sure I did sort of small little... I just don't think I ever sat down and wrote a story for fun.
No creativity,
I think I had a lot of creativity.
No creativity.
I did plays. I put on so many plays for my parents.
Well, did you ever try and write one?
Not written down. No, it was all about improvisation and theatricality.
Well, I can see that. I can see that. But I think you're wrong. I think a lot of children do pick up a pencil and pen and write whatever, just for the fun of it.
I think there might be a gender divide on this.
Maybe.
I think girls are more likely to sit down and write and boys might go off and be a bit more bombastic.
Well, I could do both, thank you very much.
I'm sure you can.
I was just as bombastic when I was writing diary notes and love letters and the like.
I can't say I've ever written a love letter on a piece of paper.
And I'm sure you haven't received one either.
Yeah, probably not.
But send your views, post your comments. Clearly not many children are picking up a pen for anything other than homework these days, and most of their homework is online. gbnews.com/your say. Should we be worried about that? And bring us your thoughts about everything else we're going to be discussing. Headlines with Aaron now.
Good afternoon, it's 2:02. I'm Aaron Armstrong. Home Secretary James Cleverly has refused to clarify exactly how many migrant visas will be allowed each year after vowing to introduce an annual cap. The Conservatives have pledged to limit entry for those coming to the UK to work or join family in an effort to reduce immigration, while MPs would vote on a number recommended by the Migration Advisory Committee. Net levels, that's the difference between people leaving and arriving in the UK each year, are now 3 times higher than they were in 2019. But Home Secretary James Cleverly says their plan will help strike a balance between the benefits and costs of migration.
If we are returned to government, we have committed to a scheme to cap the level of work-related visas. The Migration Advisory Committee will crunch the numbers to balance the economic needs of the country against the pressure on public services and suggest to the government a level.
Well, the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, says the Conservatives are responsible for the rising numbers and points out this reverses the decision the party took 4 years ago when it reformed the immigration system as part of Brexit.
The Conservatives have let immigration get out of control. We've got record numbers of people coming to this country, and they've now said they're going to have a visa cap. They've not said what the number is. They've got a visa cap without a cap. We did have a visa cap before. Rishi Sunak argued to get rid of it, which they did in 2020, and now they're going back to it, but without a number. It is utter chaos.
More than 200 migrants have arrived in the UK on small boats this morning. GB News can reveal 4 small boats made the journey from northern France after 63 people managed to cross yesterday. It takes the total number of illegal migrants who've arrived here by small boat this year to more than 10,500. That's a 38% increase on the same time last year. Sir Ed Davies says his plan to invest in personal care will help to rescue the NHS, which is on its knees. The Lib Dems say they'd introduce free day-to-day care in England for adults in need, including the elderly and disabled, and they've pledged to increase carers' wages. They say their £3.7 billion plan for social care will be paid for by reversing tax cuts to big banks. Sir Ed, who himself cares for a disabled son, says the investment will ultimately ease pressure on the National Health Service.
We need more people to be supported in care, to look after loved ones who are either waiting to be discharged from hospital or so they don't have to go into hospital. If we do that, we rescue our NHS. Our NHS is on its knees, and one of the main reasons it's on its knees is people haven't invested in social care and they haven't looked after family carers, and our package today does just that.
Well, some medical procedures have been cancelled or redirected to other NHS providers following a cyber attack on major hospitals in London. Staff at King's College Hospital, Guy's and St Thomas's and primary care services in the capital have been told their sites were hit by a major IT incident. Health trusts are reporting the incident has had a major impact on the delivery of services, with blood transfusions particularly affected. A ferry carrying D-Day veterans to France for the 80th anniversary commemorations left Portsmouth earlier this morning. The Mont Saint-Michel was accompanied by a number of Royal Navy vessels. 3 of these patrol boats, Trumpeter, Medusa and Basher, as well as a mine hunter and a training ship, along with a couple of tugs, as it left Portsmouth Harbour. And also earlier this morning, US troops were on a replica landing craft. This is at Omaha Beach, part of the D-Day commemorations in Normandy. Omaha, one of the 2 beaches taken by US forces 80 years ago. Kenneth Nishiyori told us about the impact D-Day had on his grandfather, who took part in the landing.
I'm amazed that he was even actually here, because it was an experience he never talked about. Like a lot of veterans, you rarely heard any war stories. And I knew he was in the Army, but that was it. Growing up as a kid, I'd never heard any stories. It wasn't until I got a box of letters from my mom, from granddaddy to grandma, talking about his time in France.
DNA tests have revealed 3 babies have been abandoned by the same parents over the past 7 years. One of the children was about an hour old when she was found abandoned in a shopping bag in a park in East London earlier this year. It was in January, amid sub-zero conditions. Her 2 siblings, both boys, were discovered in similar circumstances in 2017 and 2019. The details have emerged after reporting restrictions were lifted. A police investigation into the parents' identity is ongoing. And 10 fire engines and around 70 firefighters tackle a major blaze in East London earlier. It broke out in a 10-floor construction site in Canning Town. No reports of any injuries. People in the area have been advised to keep their windows and doors closed. The cause of the fire is under investigation. We'll be back with more throughout the afternoon, but if you want more now, scan the QR code on your screen for GB News alerts, and it's also on our website, gbnews.com. Now back to Tom and Emily.
Good afternoon. Britain, 8 minutes past 2. Some breaking news to bring you just now. The former Labour candidate, Faiza Shaheen, she was expecting to stand for the eminently winnable seat of Chingford and Woodford Green. She was deselected from that seat only a matter of days ago by the National Executive Committee of the Labour Party. She has now resigned her membership of the Labour Party.
Yes, and she has been. Now, that seat is Ian Duncan Smith's seat, so this would have been a very big one for her to win. But yes, she has now resigned from the party. She was deselected. She's been very vocal, hasn't she, in recent days? She said that the Labour Party has been systematically Islamophobic and the like, did she not? And she said all sorts of things. So it's hardly surprising, perhaps, that she's chosen to resign.
It's interesting because this feeds into this wave of left-wing activity and independent activity. There are all sorts of groups now that are funding Green candidates, independent candidates, pro-Palestine candidates. Jeremy Corbyn is standing, of course, as an independent candidate in Islington. There'll be a question mark over whether Faiza Shaheen now will stand as an independent candidate in Chingford and Woodford Green, and whether that will split the left-wing vote. Of course, nominations will not close for that seat until the end of the week, as they do across the country, so we won't know who the candidates are until that point.
Yeah, she was very upset indeed, so it'll be very interesting to see if she decides to go it alone, go in on an independent ticket. But that's the breaking news. She's decided to resign from Labour and has put out a statement to that effect.
But of course,
Chingford and Woodford Green.
Of course, as we have mentioned, one of the candidates who is standing in that seat, it's worth mentioning that for the Greens, Chris Brodie is standing, Ian Duncan Smith for the Conservatives, Josh Hadley for the Liberal Democrats, Yousaf Khan for the Workers' Party of Great Britain, Paul Luguri for Reform UK, and for Labour, Sharma Tatler has replaced Faiza Shaheen. So that's the list for that seat.
Well, there you go. Now, more on the breaking news that a cyber attack has affected some major hospitals in London, affecting services like blood transfusions, some of which have had to be cancelled.
Well, our reporter Charlie Peters joins us now to tell us more, because, Charlie, a hugely concerning development.
That's right, Tom, and a critical incident has now been declared as several hospitals in London have been caught up in this incident. As we understand, it's the Royal Brompton Hospital in Chelsea, Guy's and St Thomas's in Lambeth, the King's College Hospital in Denmark Hill, Camberwell, South London, and also the Harefield Hospital out in Hillingdon. So several hospitals caught in this situation, also some primary care centres, according to health sources. And the crux of this issue revolves around a pathology company called Synovis. It's had contracts with the NHS since 2021. And it's understood that a cyber attack has affected its IT systems, and it deals mostly in clinical pathology. So it's the assessment of blood diagnosis. This is limiting transfusions, particularly blood transfusions. But when you can't safely bring blood into a patient, that's going to have knock-on effects on other potentially risky surgeries where there is a concern around potential hemorrhaging or massive blood loss. During those procedures, you need to know that the pathology has been done and the blood sources are safe. So that's had a significant effect. Speaking to medical sources in the last hour, a medic in King's College Hospital down in Denmark Hill told me that several surgeries that were planned for today were cancelled today. People getting prepped for theatre suddenly cancelled. They had no idea when procedures might return, and did say that it was an awful situation in the hospital. Lots of panicking going on as they react to this dire situation. There's no indication of what might occur now, and there's also very limited information on the cause of this cyber attack. As we understand it, it's a ransomware attack. And for those who aren't used to these situations, that's when details and files are encrypted by a hostile actor who then, often in cases of trying to take over money or influence, will then offer the encryption code to allow the source to have re-access to those files. But as we understand it, a ransomware attack has now occurred, completely encrypting the Synovis pathology details, limiting clinicians' access to that information, which, as you said, has massively limited access to that pathology data, putting lots of surgeries at risk and many procedures cancelled today across at least 4 major hospitals in London. We also understand that it includes the Evelina Centre at Guy's and St Thomas's. The Evelina Centre is the paediatric care unit in London. It's a significant children's hospital. That's also being affected by this ransomware attack. More information in the next few hours, I'm sure.
Hugely worrying, Charlie, not only for patients, of course, staff members too, but for national security. 4 hospitals hit by a cyber attack, and you say, as it stands, we don't actually know where this came from.
That's right. The first bit of information seems to have come out yesterday when Synovis was first affected by this IT attack, but information's only reached us in the last few hours, with the critical incident being declared, as far as we can tell, just after midday in the last couple of hours. No information on the source of this cyber attack, which, as we said, is understood to be a ransomware attack, and no further information on when it might be recovered. One source speaking to the Health Service Journal earlier today said that accessing pathology data could take weeks, not days. So a very troubling situation for people who are lined up for procedures in these major central London hospitals over the coming days.
Raises the question about security in all these hospitals. I know that a lot of the IT systems are running very old tech. This isn't the first time there's been a cyber attack on the NHS. Charlie, we'll be back with you as anything else develops on this breaking story.
But in other news, could tonight's first TV debate between Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer be a critical point, even a turning point in the race for number 10?
Well, as things stand, the Labour Party is on course to win a landslide victory, according to the latest GBNews People's Poll.
Yes, it sees 46% of the public voting for Labour, while 22% would vote Conservative.
And a new YouGov poll says that Labour is on course to win 422 seats in the Commons, leaving the Tories with just 140 seats. And that was a big, special, what's known as an MRP mega poll. But could the leaders of these two parties facing off on the cameras tonight change that dynamic?
Well, joining us now is Christopher Hope, GB News political editor. Christopher, I put that question to you. Could this TV debate have a significant impact?
Hi Tom, hi Emily, that's right. Well, you're joining me in Salford in Manchester, where later on today we're going to hear from both the main two party leaders, Sir Keir Starmer, Rishi Sunak, debating head-to-head for the first time of this election campaign for ITV, 9 p.m. till 10 p.m. We'll be live for viewers of GB News in the spin room. I'm there talking to the colleagues of theirs, shadow ministers, leading up to and after that big event. But it could be, I think, a significant moment, I think. It's the first chance, I think, for voters to look at Sir Keir Starmer, the Labour leader. He's been doing some preparation, and for Rishi Sunak, he's well known, but he may want to appear more headmasterly than head boy-like. But earlier we heard from Sir Keir Starmer, the Labour leader, about how he had been getting ready for tonight's big debate.
Very good. I'm looking forward to the opportunity to speak directly to voters through the debate and to put our case, because at the end of the day, it is that clear choice, and I think voters will see that tonight. More of the same. 14 years of this, and after 14 years, nothing is better than when the Tories started. We can end that, turn the page and start to rebuild our country with the Labour Party. And I'm much looking forward to be able to make that argument in the debates this evening. Well, look, I've got a team preparing with me. It's much the same team as for parliamentary, for PMQs. And I suppose the best bit for the staff is that they get the opportunity in the debate prep to put the difficult questions to me. So they're relishing that.
Keir Starmer there, the Labour leader. Now, it's quite clear that for many this will be the first opportunity to get a look at Sir Keir Starmer. We see him weekly, don't we, on PMQs Live on GB News when he grills Rishi Sunak, asking questions of him. But now it's back on Keir Starmer. What would you do if you became Prime Minister 4 weeks in a month's time? A month today is a general election, of course. Rishi Sunak, he practiced for these kind of debates when he debated with Liz Truss back in those leadership debates back in 2022. Back then he became like a Duracell bunny, often interrupting Liz Truss. That annoyed viewers, annoyed voters. He was told he was mansplaining to a woman. So I think he may want to rein him back in and be more presidential, be more like a Prime Minister and less like the head boy, which he can appear at sometimes.
Well, Christopher Hope, thank you very much for that preview. We look forward to you in the spin room, hopefully grabbing some of the biggest beasts from both of those parties and getting them head-to-head. Well, let's speak now to the former Special Advisor, Kevin Marr, because, Kevin, a lot of people have been questioning whether this was smart for Keir Starmer to set this race up as Sunak versus Starmer. Isn't that the framing that number 10 wants to say, that it's either this guy or this guy and no other parties have a look in?
That's a very good point. I mean, it's high risk for both men for lots of different reasons. But I think what we would probably both agree on is that the kind of format where you've got multiple party leaders never really works in terms of television, and it never really works in terms of politics either. And what it tends to do is elevate fringe parties and perhaps give them far more welly than they either would get on their own merits or perhaps deserve as well. So I suspect that there's a slight accord between both the red and blue camps here to say, actually, in reality, only one of us is ever going to be stood on the threshold of number 10 on the 4th of July. So why don't we just cut to the chase and do this between us anyway? Because that's the fundamental choice, I guess, that's put before voters at a general election.
Yes, but Kevin, lots of people getting in touch saying, why on earth aren't the other leaders involved in this? They want to see what everyone else has to say. It's not just Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer standing for election.
It is. I mean, in a sense, you're never going to get a format that everybody agrees on. I mean, you could look at this and say, should Ed Davey, as the leader of the Liberal Democrats, be on? But I mean, the Lib Dems at the moment only have a very small number of seats. What about the SNP? What about Plaid Cymru? What about George Galloway and the Workers' Party?
And Reform, of course, Nigel Farage.
And of course, Nigel Farage, of course, absolutely. So you would get a very kind of big and growing kind of ensemble of political leaders.
Although, Kevin,
it may be
potentially
that debates end up like that, though.
Potentially, it actually suits Keir Starmer to not have any attacks from his left. To not have the SNP saying you've U-turned on this and that and the other. To not have Plaid Cymru speaking about how the Welsh Labour Party is imploding and has kicked the Plaid agreement out of the Senedd. I mean, there's lots of different angles from which Keir Starmer would be under pressure from the left, not least over Israel and Palestine as well. Perhaps it actually suits both of these gentlemen, who are perhaps uniquely unpopular as party leaders, to avoid any criticism from the smaller parties.
It's one of the few areas of real probably agreement in a general election campaign that in a sense you would end up with, as I say, both the captain of the red team and the captain of the blue team sort of stood there like Rorke's drift, fending off political attacks from left and right and all over the place. So I think this is the forum where we might get more light than heat, but it may be that, of course, in the context of the rest of the campaign, that there has to be, for balance, there has to be a format where other party leaders are invited as well. So we'll wait and see what happens on that score. But this will probably be, in terms of telling us most about the kind of the key campaigns, this is probably the most important moment so far in the general election campaign, and probably for the rest of it as well, I suspect.
Yes, but let's be honest, the British public don't have too much trust in the leaders of these two parties, or indeed in politicians as a whole. I mean, how much will people actually change their mind viewing this? Will it just be, people are looking for the usual sound bites, aren't they, really? That's what they're expecting.
It's high risk for both men, and they'll both play a defensive game, and it's a bit like a defensive boxing match or a defensive World Cup final. It doesn't actually make brilliant television because everybody, because there's so much at stake, no one can afford to make a slip, and the preparation for these events is just a gigantic list of do's and don'ts, really. So know your stuff. But it's difficult for a prime minister. It's probably a bit more difficult for a prime minister because you're aware of the totality of everything that's going on at any one time. So Rishi Sunak, finding the time to prep for this properly is just really, really difficult, given he's running obviously such a frenetic election campaign himself anyway. So a lot to lose for Rishi Sunak, but in a sense also a lot for Keir Starmer to kind of seal the deal with the British public as well, in a format that the public really don't like listening to politicians prattle on for an hour on primetime television. So in a sense, it's a no-score draw. Is probably the best anyone's going to get.
No, I fear it might be slightly underwhelming, the sort of two rather nasal leaders of both parties. What might be more interesting is Friday's undercard debate with Penny Mordaunt and Angela Rayner and Nigel Farage and these bigger personalities. Perhaps that will actually be where the magic happens. But Kevin Marr, we're going to leave it there. Thank you very much for joining us, former Special Advisor.
Well, still to come, we're heading to Portsmouth, where events are taking place ahead of the 80th anniversary of D-Day this Thursday. You're watching Good Afternoon Britain. We're on GB News.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Mervyn Kirsch was a boy when the war began. By D-Day, he was trained and ready to fight after years waiting.
It was taking a long time. I suppose I was an agitator.
He remembers reality unfolding to the sound of thumping guns.
In the morning, about 5 o'clock, they woke me up to say we were going towards France now, and I could see the outline in the dawn. And I could hear couldn't see, but I could hear the shells, big shells going overhead both ways. Nobody was bothering to fire at me, which was quite good. Then I began to feel nervous, and I sort of realised it's not just an adventure, it's actual World War.
Mervyn served in the Ordnance Regiment. His job was to get supplies like ammunition and vehicles onto the beach. When an advance party, including some of his friends, were destroyed, Mervyn stepped up.
The head of me went to a reconnaissance unit. We were supposed to go on D+6. The reconnaissance unit was going D+2 to find a suitable site for 200 drivers and 1,000 vehicles, which we were going to stock, all kinds. They went across but they didn't get across. They were torpedoed, the only boat torpedoed that day. I was put on a boat that night, any boat, going across, and told to find a suitable site for vehicles and men. So I just crossed over them, and I landed, got to the top of the cliff, and just with a strange driver in a tracked vehicle, told him just to drive down one of the roads and see what we can find.
The People's Channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
In the GB newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
GB News brings you accurate reporting of the day's topical agenda.
When the news breaks, wherever and whenever it's happening,
we'll be there.
This is GB News.
The People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get the book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Well, good afternoon, Britain. It's 2:27, and more on the events taking place ahead of the 80th anniversary of D-Day this Thursday.
Veterans are travelling to France ahead of the big day, commemorating the largest amphibious landing in military history, which saw more than 150,000 Allied troops risking their lives by storming those Nazi-occupied beaches in Normandy and creating that fundamental turning point in the Second World War.
Yes, well, looking ahead to the anniversary is our Home and Security editor, Mark White, who's in Portsmouth. Mark, veterans have made quite the journey.
Well, they have indeed, and although many of them are now wheelchair-bound, struggling with various infirmities, because the youngest of these veterans is 97. There are 20 centenarians that have made the journey down to Portsmouth so far. It is a real toll on them, but they wanted to be here for the commemorations because they know this is a big commemoration 80 years on from D-Day, and probably the last of the big commemorations that we will see veteran representation. The last time on the 75th anniversary of D-Day there were some 500 UK veterans of D-Day. Now, according to the Ministry of Defence, there are fewer than 100. So a very poignant commemoration this particular year. That's why, of course, senior royals, VIPs, many thousands of members of the military and members of the public will be gathering to celebrate. And we saw the ferry going out this morning from Portsmouth, carrying veterans over to Normandy. Some 30 veterans on that ferry to begin with. It was accompanied by a small flotilla, a minesweeper, a couple of patrol boats, some old World War II era motor torpedo boats, a sailing ship. It was still impressive, but nothing in comparison to that armada of 7,000 vessels, big and small, including 1,200 warships that took part in the naval operation to land those troops on the 5 beaches of Normandy on the 6th of June 1944. And I spoke to a number of people that gathered to watch that flotilla leave Portsmouth this morning. This is what they said.
And it's just a privilege to be here today with the freedom that we all have and that a lot of people maybe take for granted a little bit.
Fantastic day. I think more people should be here, really.
Really kind of loud, actually, and really cool.
And yesterday it was so humbling, actually, to be invited to Southwark House, north of Portsmouth, which was the nerve centre
for the naval operation to get these ships across to Normandy to meet the veterans as they arrived there, taken there by London taxi. And among those I spoke to was George Chandler, who was a 19-year-old rating with the Royal Navy on board a motor torpedo boat out in the Channel, tasked with trying to keep the fleet safe from German attack. And he was at Omaha Beach, which was a landing spot, of course, mainly for American forces. And he still recalls very vividly the absolutely horrific scenes that he saw, the slaughter, he described it to me, on the beaches of Normandy.
Unfortunately, we had to die outside and watch this going on, and it wasn't very nice to actually watch these kids. And they were kids, they were young. I was 19 at the time. These kids were younger than me, I know they were. And we've all heard of the brash American. Boy, oh boy, were we pleased they were like that. Every time I talk to somebody about D-Day, I'm there. I'm there on D-Day watching these young American Rangers trying to get into the... Some of them were killed before they even got off their assault craft.
Well, it's just incredibly moving and humbling to listen to the recollections of veterans like George Chandler, one of fewer than 100 D-Day veterans from the UK who are still surviving, but determined to be here for these few days of commemorations to remember their fallen comrades.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Mark White there, our Home and Security Editor from Portsmouth.
Yeah, really important to listen to those stories. The further we get away from events like D-Day, the fewer of those stories we can listen to right from the source.
Absolutely. But coming up, relationships may have frayed, or relations may have frayed, between the once close Beckhams and the Sussexes, all whilst the couples go head-to-head on their Netflix popularity. We're going to hear from a showbiz expert, and we've got huge numbers of your views to get through too, so stay tuned for that.
It's 2:33. Good afternoon to you. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB newsroom. The Home Secretary, James Cleverly, has refused to clarify exactly how many migrant visas will be allowed each year after vowing to introduce an annual cap. The Conservatives have pledged to limit entry for those coming to the UK to work or to join family in an effort to reduce immigration. MPs would vote on a number that was recommended by the Migration Advisory Committee. Now, net levels of migration, the difference between people leaving and arriving in the UK each year, are 3 times higher than they were in 2019. But James Cleverly says their plan will strike a balance between the benefit and cost of migration.
If we are returned to government, we have committed to a scheme to cap the level of work-related visas. The Migration Advisory Committee will crunch the numbers to balance the economic needs of the country against the pressure on public services and suggest to the government a level.
Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer says the Conservatives are responsible for the rising number and has pointed out this policy reverses a decision the party took 4 years ago when it reformed the immigration system as part of Brexit.
The Conservatives have let immigration get out of control. We've got record numbers of people coming to this country, and they've now said they're going to have a visa cap. They've not said what the number is. They've got a visa cap without a cap. We did have a visa cap before. Rishi Sunak argued to get rid of it, which they did in 2020, and now they're going back to it but without a number. It is utter chaos.
The Lib Dems are promising free personal care for adults in need, including the elderly and disabled. Sir Ed Davey says he wants to pay carers an extra £2 an hour above the national living wage. And the £3.7 billion of investment they are pledging, he says, will ultimately benefit the NHS. He is himself a carer for a disabled son and has described the issue as a deeply personal one. Finally, a Labour candidate who was dropped last week after liking social media posts criticising Israel and its actions in Gaza has now quit the party. Faiza Shaheen, an economist, was set to contest the Chingford and Woodford Green seat held by the former Tory leader, Sir Ian Duncan-Smith. Well, she's accused Labour of subjecting her to a systematic campaign of racism, Islamophobia and bullying. Ms Shaheen may still stand as independent. She is to make an announcement tomorrow. We'll have more at the top of the next hour. You can get more right now by signing up to GB News Alerts. The QR code's on your screen and the details are on our website, gbnews.com.
Hello, good morning. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update. It's going to turn a little bit colder from the north today as a band of rain and cloud will push southeastwards. That's a cold front that's sinking southeastwards through the day. Behind it, we've got a dive of much colder air coming in from the north, so there will be a different feel to the weather by this afternoon across parts of Northern Ireland and much of Scotland. So it will turn a bit brighter as the rain and cloud does move through, but there's a risk of some quite blustery showers as well, and quite a brisk breeze. That rain will push into parts of Wales, northern England, perhaps as far south as the southwest through this afternoon. I think most of us will just see quite a lot of cloud around. Ahead of that band, still some brightness, potentially highs of around 21, 22 degrees in the south and east, but most of us are going to notice a bit of a downturn in the temperatures. Some of those showers across the highest ground of Scotland could fall as snow because it is cold enough. It's fairly unusual for this time of year. As I said, it will turn a bit brighter once that rain and cloud does clear through across parts of Northern England, Northern Ireland to end the day, and it will reside across parts of central England into the southwest and southeast by this evening. So I think despite the sunshine in this afternoon across the southeast, the cloud and rain will arrive later on today. That will push south and eastwards through the night, and behind it will turn much clearer, so quite a clear and fairly cold night to come, much colder than it has been lately. You can see temperatures dipping down into the low single figures rurally. There is a risk of a touch of grass frost locally across some places. Showers will still continue across the far northwest, across parts of Scotland, but most of us should stay dry into tomorrow morning with the best of the sunshine across southern and eastern areas. A bit of cloud will bubble up into the afternoon and showers will develop across parts of Wales, northern England, but they're going to be most frequent across parts of Northern Ireland and northwest Scotland in particular, where there is a further risk of some hill snow. And for all of us, it's going to be feeling cooler with temperatures a little below average.
The latest GB News travel.
Hello again, good afternoon to you. I'm Jules Buckley. Let's go to West Yorkshire firstly. Long queues continue for the M62 this lunchtime. Now between junction 23 Huddersfield and Rushworth Moor. At junction 24 there's ongoing emergency barrier repairs. It follows an earlier collision. There's a lane shut both east and westbound. Cheshire northbound M6 18 Middlewich up to junction 19 Knutsford. Just one lane open, so 3 lanes are closed. There are 5 lorry collision in the early hours of this morning, so still big queues. Hertfordshire, the northbound A1M from Welwyn Junction 6 up to Stevenage South at 7. Roadworks continue, a lane shutting queues. And the southbound M11 as you come off on the slip lane there towards the M25. At Junction 6, a lane shut there as a vehicle undergoes a tyre change. And that's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Right, 2:39 is the time, and Martin Dobney is up next. He joins us now. Martin, you're on from 3. What have you got in store?
Well, stand by for a sensational GB News political exclusive. We can confirm up to 6 Conservative candidates are set to sensationally defect to Reform ahead of the deadline, 4 p.m. this Friday. Could be the doomsday for the Prime Minister if those candidates declare for Reform and not the Conservatives. We'll have the full inside story on that, as the Tories today reported to be hemorrhaging donors. The money is stopping. The candidates are jumping ship. Can it get any worse for Rishi Sunak? Those TV debates now look like everything hangs on them. Plus, the European Union goes to the election polls this week. Is the spirit of Brexit in the air across France, Germany, the Netherlands, Belgium, Spain. I'll talk to an expert in Brussels who says that, yes, we could be looking at a surge of anti-EU parties across the bloc. Plus, an airline is saying we should ban booze on long-haul flights because a few people have heart attacks. Is that sensible precaution, or is it mile-high nanny state nonsense? All coming up 3 till 6.
How exciting. 6 to 7 potential Tory defections to the Reform Party. I mean, that would be catastrophic for Rishi Sunak's chances.
Well, it all depends on which seats they're standing in. Are these former MPs or are these candidates in unwinnables? I suppose you'll have all the information.
Good stuff, Martin. Well, there you go. I mean, no, but in terms of how it looks...
Yeah.
How it looks to the electorate, more defections to Reform with Nigel Farage now at the helm of that party. What's going to happen there? Is it true, and when will it happen?
Well, I suppose some of the big discussions that people will be having today all centre on this evening, because the Prime Minister and Keir Starmer have both basically gone to ground today. They're all preparing for the big showdown tonight. They're head-to-head in that debate on ITV.
Yes, indeed. What will happen? Will it be a game-changer, or have people already made up their minds? We had a little chat a little bit earlier about handwriting, or the demise of it, among children anyway. Kelly says, got my 7-year-old writing letters to his favourite footballers to encourage him to write. He was chuffed to bits to get autographs from Jack Grealish, Erling Haaland and even Marcus Rashford. Now he's an unstoppable autograph collecting letter writer. His handwriting is coming on a treat. What a fantastic idea. I am very pro handwriting.
Alison says, my 4-year-old grandson Jude wrote me a letter at the weekend about how much he loved his nanny Alison.
Aww.
It was all mixed up letters, but he signed it with his name. We should encourage our children and grandchildren to take pen to paper as much as possible. I'm one proud nanny. That is a lovely story.
Oh, isn't that lovely? And it doesn't matter if they're all jumbled up, you know, it's the effort that matters.
4 years old, it's impressive.
But Tom suggested that maybe girls are more likely to write in their spare time just for fun.
Yeah.
Shelley agrees. She says it's definitely a gender issue. My daughter spent most of her spare time writing and drawing things in beautiful handmade books and cards. However, my son, who is 10 months younger than her, never picked up a pen unless it was absolutely essential, and usually with lots of moaning from me. You know, that reminds me of... I once received a little book with a fish and it was all sparkly all over it. And what I had to do with it, I had to go around my class and get all my friends to write a little poem or something nice about me in it. Oh. And it was so lovely, and I've still got it.
Wow.
Yeah.
What do I don't think I have.
I can look back on it and see what my 7-year-old friends thought of me at the time.
Goodness me, I hope they were telling the truth.
Yeah, so maybe it is a girly thing. I did go to a girls' school.
Maybe. Goodness me, I mean, I suppose it depends how you define your free time. Of course, I wrote sort of thank you letters after receiving Christmas presents and all the rest of it, but...
It's not what we're talking about here.
I hasten to say, was that under duress?
You've got to be creative. Yes, you're probably forced. You're probably forced. And we did discuss whether the rich should pay for their own health care. I tend to think that if you've paid into the system, you should be able to use it. But Lillian says, yes, the rich should pay for health care. We know many who pay to see a private consultant and are then referred to the NHS. And these people could easily afford to pay for their treatment, whilst many like ourselves wouldn't be able to. But yes, if you've paid lots of tax into the system, surely you should be able to use the services, but perhaps not at the moment.
Well, keep those views coming in. And, of course, we'll be looking at D-Day as well. Ian has written in on that very subject. We'll no longer have any first-hand accounts. We'll soon no longer have any first-hand accounts of what happened on D-Day or other major events in the Second World War. Isn't it time we made this a part of the school curriculum? Well, Ian, I couldn't agree with you more, but I do think it is. I think we do a lot of Tudors, Second World War and Romans. Those are, I think, the three things that just about every school child should be learning about and are.
Well, this is one of my mum's gripes when she was a teacher. She was so frustrated with how history wasn't taught in a chronological way. We sort of jumped around. So you went from, you know, Civil War over here in the United States, or the Civil Rights Movement, and then to the Second World War. It's all higgledy-piggledy.
You know what we don't do? And I don't think this is on the national curriculum, but it really should be, the Glorious Revolution of 1688. Yes. I mean, the foundation of our modern constitution and our liberties, Bill of Rights. We should do all of that. And the sort of supremacy of Parliament.
Absolutely, Tom.
Yeah.
Anyway, coming up, we're going to be live in Normandy ahead of D-Day anniversary, I believe, with Ellie Costello.
is GB News, Britain's news channel.
As he kissed her goodbye with...
Ian Phoenix was in charge of a counter-terrorism group dedicated to bringing peace to Northern Ireland. He was a husband and a father.
He was a real Irishman. He had the twinkly Irish eyes. He enjoyed a good joke. He liked a good glass of wine.
Susan Phoenix first heard of the accident that killed her husband on her car radio.
I was just driving along going, no, no, no. I can still see it. I can still feel it, even 30 years on.
On the 2nd of June, 1994, the Chinook helicopter that was taking them to a peace conference crashed into the side of a mountain on the Mull of Kintyre, killing 4 crew and 25 of the country's top counter-terrorism experts. At a board of inquiry, the Ministry of Defence concluded there was no doubt whatsoever the accident had been caused by the gross negligence of the 2 pilots, Flight Lieutenants Richard Cook and Jonathan Tapper. But there was doubt. Plenty of it. There were no eyewitnesses on that foggy night, no flight data recorder, no voice recorder. It took until 2011 for the Ministry of Defence to admit they had not a shred of evidence. At the time of the crash, systematic errors in the software that controlled the engines had been reported. The MOD had seen its safety budget slashed in the run-up to the accident. In a statement, the Ministry of Defence told GB News, in 2010, the Mull of Kintyre independent review was carried out and the findings were fully accepted. The review did not find new evidence to suggest mechanical failure, and no safety issues with the Chinook Mark II were raised in the report. This weekend, the families have formed the Chinook Justice Campaign. But justice may never come.
The People's Channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the argument. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together and what have we got, in my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
This is GB News and we are Britain's election channel.
This vote may seem to be about the politicians and the media, but it's actually about you. We won't forget that.
Join us up and down the country as we follow every moment together.
More than ever, it's important to hear all sides
as you make your decision in the run-up to polling day.
This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's election channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 12 minutes to 3. And now for some breaking news. Nigel Farage, the leader of Reform UK, has had a drink thrown in his face while out on the campaign trail today. A McDonald's milkshake was thrown at him by a member of the public.
Now, this has happened to him before, has it not?
It has.
And it's happened to other politicians. I mean, is this really the way we want to go? You know, there is so much intimidation of politicians. We've had MPs coming out to say that every MP should have a protection officer. We know Nigel is out with the public very frequently, but this is just not acceptable. You don't have to agree with Nigel Farage's politics and not do such a thing.
Well, I think we've got video of the last time this happened. This was back in 2019.
Ah, yes.
Let's have a look. I believe it was in Newcastle, if I remember correctly. Yes. And a milkshake was thrown at him. And, of course, it doesn't need explaining that throwing liquid, unidentified liquid, over individuals in public, for very, very obvious reasons, is a very scary thing. We have seen instances in our major cities in recent years of people throwing things that aren't milkshakes and throwing liquid that is much more corrosive over individuals. If this sort of behaviour is normalised, I can see this going in a dark
What kind of
direction.
pathetic individual does that? I mean, oh, look at me, I'm such a big man, I'm gonna... Well, I assume it's a man, it could be a female.
It's a woman.
Oh, it's a woman. Well, there you go, there you go. Let's not be sexist here. Equal opportunities for this type of behaviour. But there you go, Nigel Farage has had a drink thrown in his face out on the campaign.
Well,
so there you go.
That is going to be on a lot of the newspaper
Make of that what you will.
Tomorrow morning. But to end the show today, ahead of the 80th anniversary of D-Day on Thursday, our presenter Ellie Costello is in Normandy for the arrival of the Torch of Commemoration. Well, D-Day veterans are arriving now. Ellie, what's going on?
Good afternoon, Tom and Emily. Yes, I'm at Ouistreham Port in Normandy, and right as we speak, the British veterans, 20 of them, have just arrived off this ferry. You can see behind me, they have just been brought down from that ferry in these special vehicles, and with them they have this torch of commemoration, which they are going to pass on to some very young people here in the port. This has all been organised by the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, and their message is light their legacy, and it is quite literally about this generation, this great war generation, these men who are now in their 90s, perhaps even into their hundreds, are back on the beaches of Normandy 80 years after storming them so bravely in order to make Europe free once more. And now they are here to pass on the torch to the next generation. They set off from Portsmouth at 8 o'clock this morning on that Brittany ferry that you might be able to see just behind these veterans here. And you can just imagine how emotional that passage was for them. Mixed emotions, smiles at being with their friends again, but also great sadness at knowing those that never made it on shore. And we do know that they did actually lay a wreath on board that ferry today in order to honour and commemorate those who never did make it on shore. They have then made their way off their ferry, and we know that they've been brought over by their friends, their family, the world's press, which we can also see around me right now. And actually looking out around the port, there are thousands of people gathered trying to catch a glimpse of these British veterans and waving to them from the streets around this port. It has really been such a moving few moments here. The pipers, actually, you might be able to catch a glimpse of the pipers just behind these veterans, were playing as that ferry came into port. So it really has been such a moving few moments. So once this torch of commemoration is passed on to the younger generation, and you might be able to catch a glimpse of it now, if you're listening on the radio, this torch of commemoration has just been seen there in front of these veterans. It's going to be passed to a Frenchman and an English young woman, and that torch is then going to be given a military escort out of this port, and that torch will then go on to light the war graves across Normandy. It's going to be a huge operation, 25,000 war graves. Those headstones are going to be lit up through candles by local school children and communities, so that all of them will be illuminated by D-Day on Thursday morning. So it is going to be a very busy operation to get all of those war graves illuminated in time. But what a fitting tribute that is to such brave men. And these veterans here that we can see in front of these cars waiting to pass on this torch of commemoration, you can only imagine how exhausted they are, these men in their 90s and in their 100s now. They've been on that ferry since 8 o'clock this morning, but they are still, at least the two I can see in front of me, are standing with all their medals on their chest. Really are incredible men from an incredible generation, and it's so important that we don't forget them. And that's why this year's theme from the Commonwealth War Graves Commission of lighting their legacy is just so very important. You may have seen that survey out last week from the Commonwealth War Graves Commission that showed that nearly half of young adults do not know what D-Day is. 48% of people didn't realise that that was the date that Allied forces landed on the beaches of Normandy, and that is why this awareness, this education is just so important, to hear the eyewitness accounts of these brave men and what they saw here on the beaches of Normandy. just 20 making it over on the ferry this year. In 2019, there were 255 veterans who made this very same journey. So it just goes to show, doesn't it, that we are losing this generation and how important it is to remember their stories and remember the ultimate sacrifice.
Moment, Ellie, and this is an important commemoration, particularly for the future generations, because, as you say, these people, these heroes, really, perhaps won't be around for the future anniversaries, certainly not the 100th.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Ellie Costello there, GB News presenter, live from Normandy, bringing that special moment, a moving moment, commemoration, passing on the memory to future generations. Thank you very much indeed for joining us today. That's it from us.
Absolutely, but we'll have so much more with a packed show back for you tomorrow. And do stick around for Martin Daubney. He'll have so much more information on that scoop that he's going to be delivering on just how many Conservative candidates could well be switching to Reform ahead of the deadline, that close of nominations later this week. All to come after 3.
I'm Patrick Christie's. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threats on.
Our job is to do what's in the best interest of our country.
You made my argument for me.
My guest and I tackle the issues that really matter with a sharp take on every story.
I'm hearing it up and down the country. That was a beginning, not an end.
It's the Great British Summer Giveaway, and have we got a prize for you? There's a totally tax-free £15,000 in cash to make your summer spectacular. Spend that extra cash however you like. You'll also win a brand new iPhone, Apple AirPods, and if that wasn't enough, a £500 voucher to spend at your favourite UK attraction, so you can enjoy amazing days out this year. For a chance to win the iPhone, treats, and £15,000 cash, text prize to 63232. Text costs £2 plus 1 standard network rate message, or post your name and number to GB06 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 28th of June. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
GB News brings you accurate reporting of the day's topical agenda.
When the news breaks, wherever and whenever it's happening,
We'll be there.
This is GB News.
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Patrick Christie's. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threats on.
Our job is to do what's in the best interest of our country.
You made my argument for me.
My guest and I tackle the issues that really matter with a sharp take on every story.
I'm hearing it up and down the country. That was a beginning, not an end.
Patrick Christie's tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
It's true. You're not wrong. No one will be cancelled.
Lovely.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry. Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking,